Funding for Shaperless is provided by
Surfshark VPN, the sponsor of today's video. Holy halibut gamers, we're finally at the end! This is part 6 of a 6-part video series with Space Tree Studios on BoJack Horseman. That means there's 5 other parts before this. We're talking about the last season of the show. If you haven't seen any of the other videos, go back and watch those now. Do your homework. Seriously, if you haven't seen the other parts yet, what are you doing here? So, season 6. I'm not really sure how popular of an opinion this is. I don't know how most people rank the seasons of this show. But this one is pretty easily my second least favorite, only ranking above season 1. Is it still great? Well yeah, of course, it's BoJack. There's still a ton of stellar stuff in this last season. But I also feel like the writers started running out of steam a bit as they chugged along to the finish line. Again, not bad, just a little uneven is all.
It is weird to think how there was apparently supposed to be a 7th season after this point. There was a big strike that happened at Netflix a few years back, and as a result, BoJack got cancelled. But in order for the series to wrap up and not end on a cliffhanger, they were given an additional 4 episodes for an extended season 6, so they had more time to end the show. As a result, while it feels like they were running out of steam for some plot lines, others feel rushed in comparison, purely in order to get there before the show ends. Hell, some plotlines feel like they're rushed and go on for too long. How the hell does that happen? So in a way, BoJack Season 6 feels like a compromise. It's still a good compromise, but a compromise nonetheless.
I think the weirdest thing about BoJack's cancellation is the fact that narratively, I don't really see how the show could have gone past 6 seasons. It always felt like the first 3 seasons were the first half of the BoJack narrative, depicting his seemingly endless downward spiral, whereas the second half of the series would depict him trying to climb his way out of it and actively become a better person. Ultimately, as the show is, the idea comes across really well, and I don't think it would have been conveyed nearly as well if his attempts at redemption went on longer than his 3-season fall. There's only so many times BoJack can run away from everything or try to get help before falling into yet another self-destructive pattern. Because the more you do these sort of things, the more the show runs the risk of getting repetitive. I think they ended at the absolute perfect time, but it's honestly shocking to consider that 6 seasons worth of content wasn't their intention. We'll never really know what would have happened in a potential season 7. Maybe some of the subplots in the back half of season 6 would have been given more time and had been better fleshed out. But ultimately, in spite of the last season's flaws, I do think it's a mostly really good conclusion for the series.
Well, without further ado, here's Season 6, Episode 1. A horse walks into rehab, and the therapist says, "Okay, will that be cash or credit?" Rehab is expensive. This episode mainly focuses on BoJack as he begins his journey to finally get help. We see him struggle with getting into the groove, clashing with the people there, namely the receptionist and Dr. Champ, the therapy horse. As the weeks go on, we see the routine is actually good for BoJack. He starts to get along with the others, and it seems like he's really starting to show growth. Also, there's a guy there dressed like Mario. It's fucking epic. Directed by Zack Snyder. But around the time he's supposed to get out, we find out that another patient named Jameson is found out to have smuggled in alcohol, and once caught by BoJack, she breaks out. BoJack, being a good Samaritan all of a sudden, now decides he has to get her to come back. So he leaves with her in an attempt to get her to go back to rehab with him.
Throughout all this, we get a ton of flashbacks of BoJack remembering various times over the years when he had alcohol, including the immediate aftermath of Sarah Lynn's death, on the set of Horsing Around, at a party when he was a teenager, in his dad's office when he walked in on him getting funky with the secretary, and finally, what seems to be his very first time, taking a sip as a kid in the aftermath of a party his parents held. The episode keeps going further and further back in time, showing just how ingrained alcohol has been in his life from the very beginning, how he uses it to cope with certain situations, how its influence is a detriment to the people around him. Essentially, this episode is a microcosm of BoJack's history with substance abuse, and the unfortunate consequences that come from it. He wants to be there for Jameson and try and steer her away from making the same mistakes he did, but he's BoJack, not the most responsible horse in the stable.
Also, there's a part while they're at the party where there's a sight gag where a fly girl is making out with a dude, and how does that work? He's not related to the fly from Meet the Feebles, is he? Additionally, BoJack calls Diane in order to find Jameson's dad's house, giving a good excuse to hear from the main cast again in one big group call. Diane adds in Todd because Todd is helpful, then PC calls Todd to get an update on Untitled Princess Carolyn project and her milk, and then Mr. Peanutbutter calls her because downtown Julie Brand had a drone accident or something. It makes sense in context. But hey, it gives us a snapshot at all the plotlines we'll be seeing them go through this season. Especially since BoJack is gonna be locked into one place for the majority of this first half. There's also a fun visual gag where Todd gets on the porcupine bus, and the moment he gets on, he's squished by all the porcupines, and in that moment, Mr. Peanutbutter joins the call, squishing him into frame. Good detail.
I need to get milk.
Ultimately, BoJack and Jameson start breaking a bunch of her dad's famous movie memorabilia since BoJack assumes her dad is awful, like his dad was. But then he realizes her dad is pretty chill and just wanted her to get better in rehab. And that sparks a bit of jealousy and frustration that Jameson doesn't appreciate her actually caring parent, considering BoJack never got that. So yeah, in general, this is a great first episode for the season, introducing us to BoJack's new status quo and the general headspace he's at through this current moment. Anyway though, from here on out, instead of going episode by episode like we normally do, we're gonna take a look at each of the supporting characters one by one and cover their entire journeys throughout episodes 1 through 8 of the season. Let's start with the focus of episode 2, the Princess of Carolina. Holy shit, her episode gave me so much anxiety, goddamn.
Princess Carolyn finds out the hard way that parenting is not as easy as she thought it would be. She struggles to find a good work-life balance with taking care of her as of yet unnamed child, helping film Birthday Dad, and deal with general agent stuff like having to organize a woman's gala. Every main action she does leaves behind a time trial ghost of her doing said action, accompanied by the sounds of her previous actions. This gives the whole episode a sense of rhythm, as every ghost follows her the entire episode. It's a great way to illustrate her struggling with having to do all this every single day, while piling on even more work each time. It's a never-ending cycle. A perfect encapsulation of what being a new parent is like, especially for a single mother. Eventually, she reconciles with Vanessa Gecko, who gives her strong words of encouragement, and makes an agreement with Todd to have him babysit the baby while she's busy.
I always particularly liked the reveal that Vanessa Gecko never actually hated PC. It's a funny little bow on this episode that shows just how skewed PC's perspective has been all these years. This was a really good PC episode, and definitely one of her most sympathetic portrayals in the show. Though, part of me feels like it didn't necessarily resolve her main issue. Like, she's overworked as all hell trying to take care of her projects and her baby in this episode. But then she's not really that stressed out at all going forward. This is largely because she gets Todd's help to watch and take care of the baby, but even so, it kind of feels like her getting a baby at all, after all the buildup it received in the previous seasons, didn't really amount to much now that she has one. She's largely the same as she's ever been after this one episode of her being more stressed than normal. And it does beg the question of whether this plotline would have received more focus had the show not been canceled and condensed into this last season. So yeah, this is sadly the last PC-focused episode we'll get over the course of the show. But ultimately, I do think her journey was fulfilling. I've been pretty open about not really liking her that much in the early seasons, and being dissatisfied with her more morally questionable actions in later seasons that don't get called out. But at the end of the day, she's a very complex, entertaining, and sympathetic character who's a big part of why this show is as strong as it is.
Princess Carolyn gets put on the back burner for a bit, but she does play a prominent role towards the end of the first half. As a result of BoJack telling an assistant to stand up for herself, all of the assistants in LA go on strike. This makes it hard for basically any agent or manager in the city to get anything done. They can't even have babies correctly without them, what the fuck? So it's up to PC and Lenny Turtletop to rope everyone back in with some pretty underhanded methods. They break up the unionization effort by promoting key players to higher positions of their own with better pay, and go down the list from there. Eventually, only Stuart is left, Princess Carolyn's assistant. However, during the whole ordeal, Princess Carolyn has a flashback back to when she was just an agent, and realizes she's no better than her old boss. That's what sets her on the track to get the assistants a better deal. It's a good way to show her growth and to atone for her own actions in perpetuating Hollywood's horrible status quos over the course of the previous seasons. After walking Stuart to the car he doesn't own, Princess Carolyn decides to call someone in who would actually be able to help the assistants get the treatment they deserve. Everyone, please welcome back to the stage the greatest fictional character of all time, Judah. Judah, being the ultimate Giga Chad he is, puts Lenny in his place and gets the real negotiations going. What a fucking gamer.
So yeah, a really good way to somewhat redeem Princess Carolyn for all the negative, industry-perpetuating stuff she's done in the past. I really like that they added this. Alright, who's next on the character list? Well, we might as well knock out Todd.
You did what to Todd? That's not nice.
Oh, you're right. Fuck.
He doesn't want that either!
Oh god, that's right too. Oh well, let's just jump into this. Todd, during the first 4 episodes of this season, is Todd. He's still doing Todd-related things, while the main shenanigan he gets up to is being Princess Carolyn's new live-in nanny for Ruthie.
I wish I could live in the nanny. That is a sex joke, sir.
There's not really a ton to say about him until we finally get to his main plotline for the season in episode 5. Yeah, the first time I watched this, I really wondered if they had just run out of things for Todd to do, but it turns out they were just procrastinating. Just like us! Anyway, Todd gets a visit from his stepfather Jorge, who asks if Todd can donate his kidney for his ailing mother. Turns out Todd already traded it in to get sock puppets. I would expect nothing less of him. So as Todd and Jorge go on a wacky mission to retrieve the kidney, we see that their relationship is pretty strained, with Jorge considering Todd to be a disappointment who can't take anything seriously. And much like we said about Yolanda not being able to acknowledge Todd's wackily achieved accomplishments last season, it is kind of weird to see Jorge so adamantly believe that Todd hasn't done anything in his life. Again, he was the governor of California and the CEO of an entire company, but these accomplishments aren't brought up at all. Not even for Jorge to acknowledge that they were both kind of flukes and Todd didn't earn either one. If they had done that, then I could understand Jorge expressing disappointment with Todd's lifestyle. But instead, they just don't bring up the very real powerful positions Todd has held, even if he achieves said positions in wacky ways. Even so, I like Todd and Jorge's relationship and how they work through their conflicting feelings about each other, as well as Todd working out his feelings about his mother, who kicked him out of the house all those years ago. I'd say this is a pretty good final season plotline to round out Todd's character, and we'll have more to say about that when we get to the second half of the season.
Anyway, it's time to talk about everyone's favorite canine co-star, Mr. Peanutbutter, also known as the national face of dumbass. So his story is a bit more space to the center of the season. He starts off hard at work on Birthday Dad, the stupid dumb movie he came up at the end of season 5. The film is in intense development hell because Mr. Peanutbutter keeps demanding changes in reshoots. Why? Because he has no idea how to confess to Pickles that he cheated on her and is using the movie as a way to project. After several directors and massive cuts, the movie ends up being 40 minutes long. Luckily, Princess Carolyn has the idea to pitch it as a TV series instead, saving the production. Also, at one point, Mr. Peanutbutter brings up the distracted boyfriend meme because he is with Pickles and is distracted by Diane. This is a thing that happened in the show and not something we made up for an ironic joke. They really just did that shit. Todd dabbed in season 5. At some point during all of this, Mr. Peanutbutter shows up to visit BoJack in rehab. Nothing big happens here, and Mr. Peanutbutter is just projecting more about what he did and trying to come to terms with it. He already knows what the right thing to do is, he's just kind of looking for excuses to not tell her. Ironically, BoJack is the one who has to sit him down and tell him to confess to Pickles. BoJack is the one who gave him some solid dick from an Iron Man. So finally, the drama comes to a head in the episode Surprise.
Gimme, you lighting a long fuse on a short stick of dynamite.
Wait, that's Granddad.
Where he finally tells Pickles what happened.
I cheated on you!
Right as his friends and family were hosting a surprise party for them. Uh-oh, wacky hijinks! I don't understand how Mr. Peanutbutter and Pickles didn't hear the crowd half shouting, "Surprise!" They were not quiet. So the first half of this episode is all of the partygoers having to hide and sneak around the house while Mr. Peanutbutter and Pickles argue, and the partygoers have to not be seen. The joke is funny at first, but on repeat viewings you kinda want to get a move on.
Yeah, I just kind of feel like maybe this concept shouldn't have been stretched out to 22 minutes. It's understandable why everyone had to hide at first, because it would have been really bad if they were noticed when Mr. Peanutbutter first confesses that he cheated. But after most of the partygoers escape and we're just left with the main characters constantly trying to hide, yeah, I don't know, it kind of feels like the gag has worn out its welcome. There are some pretty funny bits here and there, like BoJack and Diane imitating random smart house devices to drive Mr. Peanutbutter away, or Todd trying to distract Pickles by commenting on her livestream that she should take a bath, before realizing, oh no, now people are gonna want her bath water. Todd's in the bathtub and he didn't think this through. But they don't fully save the premise from being a little tiring as it goes on. It's especially weird because at the end of the episode, they all just casually walk out of his house in front of him and Pickles with no explanation given. What was stopping them from doing that before then?
I get what they're going for here. It's the big anticlimax fuck it joke. But after spending all that time hiding from him, all just to walk out at the end, come on, you could have done something better or funnier. Granted, it is Mr. Peanutbutter. He probably wouldn't question BoJack and Todd strolling out of his closet too much since that's exactly the kind of thing he would do. But slightly weak ending. Also, I first watched this episode like a week before I saw Parasite in theaters, so in that one scene where they have to hide from the rich family, all I could think about was Weird Al Dog. But yeah, the episode basically ends with Peanutbutter and Pickles striking a deal that to get back at him, Pickles gets to cheat on him for free. So in a way, Mr. Peanutbutter gets off easy with her. He still has other consequences from other people, but with Pickles specifically, it's pretty easy. For now, Pickles, as it turns out, is an internet influencer and was conveniently live streaming all of this. So now all of Hollywood knows that Mr. Peanutbutter cheated on her. This results in Mr. Peanutbutter getting canceled in real life. Mr. Peanutbutter got canceled before BoJack. How the hell does that work? In order to get uncanceled, he teams up with a new character, Joey Pogo, to become the national face of depression. Okay, so who's Joey Pogo? Joey is a young up-and-coming pop star, first introduced while BoJack is at rehab. We'll get to what they do when we get to BoJack, but for Mr. Peanutbutter, he is there to essentially act as his new Todd for the season. He's the one getting into wacky shenanigans with him for the next batch of episodes. They first meet when Joey drives through the set of Birthday Dad and almost hits Mr. Peanutbutter with his incredibly slow-moving car. But Mr. Peanutbutter is too stupid to get out of the way, so Princess Carolyn comes up with an excuse that Mr. Peanutbutter is a sad dog, and that he jumped in front of the car on purpose. This leads into the National Face of Depression story arc, with Mr. Peanutbutter and Joey Pogo educating the youth of America on depression. Yes, this show is still called BoJack Horseman. No, BoJack is not the face of depression somehow. All the while, they're still trying to find the right guy for Pickles to sleep with. And that's kind of it. More of them happens in the second half of the season, but also not really. We can't really deep dive into what lesson he learns until then. He just kind of spins his wheels for a little bit here and there. He's still funny, but he doesn't really grow at all until part 2.
Overall, I'm honestly kind of mixed on everything involving Mr. Peanutbutter this season. Everything that is, except Birthday Dad. I was skeptical at first of the Birthday Dad joke continuing throughout this entire season, but it ended up being one of my favorite aspects of Mr. Peanutbutter's entire character. Like, if you took the essence of Mr. Peanutbutter and turned that into a show, this delightfully stupid yet hilariously earnest masterpiece is exactly what you'd get. I love how the Nobel Prize for Television was invented just for this show. Truly incredible. Apart from that, I was kind of mixed on Surprise, as I stated earlier, and I feel like the whole Pickles plotline really did not need to be dragged out past the first half of the season. Eventually, it becomes really obvious that the two of them aren't going to stay together, so by the time you get to the second half of the season, you just think to yourself, oh, we're still dealing with this? I don't know, I guess you could argue they didn't have time to wrap it up in the first half, especially since they wanted to make him the national face of depression, which was a decent set of gags, I guess. I find the way the plotline started to be rather contrived and awkward. Like, out of nowhere, PC shoves him in front of Joey Pogo's car and makes up a whole narrative about his depression, and it just feels like a bit of a stretch. Of course, everyone believes it completely, because this is wacky BoJack world we're talking about, and that's fine. But from an audience perspective, I still think it's weirdly abrupt and out of nowhere. I also just find Joey Pogo to be really boring. Like, I feel like the quality of the goofy side characters started to degrade a bit over time, and in particular, Joey just really isn't that funny or interesting.
Joey definitely feels like a new character introduced in the last season of a show. There isn't much time to build them up at all. What you see is what you get. They really do feel like a character added in to fill a gap in a character dynamic, because the character that usually takes that role is busy with their own thing for once. You can see the version of this where Todd is still there helping Mr. Peanutbutter, finding someone to sleep with Pickles, getting into wacky depression spokesperson stuff with. Minus the way this arc ends, Joey just kind of feels like a diet Todd. They're not a bad character or anything, they just kind of exist.
With that said, it is conceptually funny to make the most jovial and cheerful character the national face of depression. And there are some very funny jokes here and there related to both the depression PSA campaign and the sad dog meme. My personal favorite is, but doctor, I am sad dog. Some solid stuff, so I don't dislike this side plot, it's just not the greatest. Let's move swiftly along to Diane! She's in a very interesting place compared to most other seasons, and that interesting place is Chicago! I was in Chicago a couple months ago and I saw this artwork on the side of a building. It's Larv! Look at him! He's Larv! This has absolutely nothing to do with BoJack or the rest of the video, I just wanted to mention Larv. So Diane in this season is really interesting because for the first time, we get to really focus on just her. She's given a plotline that doesn't revolve around Mr. Peanutbutter or BoJack, and instead just focuses on her writing struggles and self-worth issues and trying to fight a megacorporation run by a southern albino whale. It's some great stuff. Out of everyone in the first half of this season, I think Diane was the most consistently engaging for me. So basically, Girl Crush has pivoted to video and she's driving across the country making content for them with her new boyfriend slash cameraman, Guy, aka the best new character this season. The two of them are a really good match, and one thing I really love about Guy is how natural his vocal delivery is. Lakeith Stanfield's voice for him is really laid back and chill, which serves as a great contrast to the over-the-top, larger-than-life performances of practically every other character on this show. I feel like that might have been an intentional choice since he's a Chicago-style guy, rather than a Hollywood person. It's similar to how natural Sadie sounded in Season 5. But yeah, good shit with Guy. It's nice to just have a normal, kind, supportive person in Diane's life. And in the show in general. But Diane and Guy's relationship isn't the only reason why Feel Good Story is my favorite episode out of the first 6 of this season. The main reason is Jeremiah White Whale, who's just such a delightfully evil, crispy old fuck.
Hey, I don't know what Jeff Bezos actually sounds like, so for all I know, this is it. And frankly, I don't want to know. I never wanted to know what Ben Shapiro sounded like either, and then one day I found out accidentally, and realized he sounds like the fake voice my buddy Alex uses when he's saying something stupid on purpose. Ben Shapiro sounds stupid is the point here. Jeremiah White Whale, on the other hand, is the greatest animated villain of all time.
Everything about him, from his aggressively cheerful introduction video detailing how he monopolized everything around him, to his distinct southern drawl brought to us by the ever-talented Stephen Root, to this scene, which is probably the funniest joke in the entirety of seasons 4 through 6.
Just because it passed the House doesn't mean the Senate
Really, Diane?
Okay, but the president could still veto.
Really, Diane?
All right, sure, but the Supreme Court... Okay, I get it.
It's genuinely hysterical, in spite of it being so depressing. Jeremiah White Whale is such a poignant and hilariously realized depiction of an evil corporation head. And I was legitimately disappointed as the season went on and I realized that he was only in this one episode. I kept waiting for him to appear when Todd and Jorge were getting the kidney back. Or for him to show up later and, I don't know, attack and dethrone God or something because he believes he can do it with all his money. I just feel like they created an exceptionally hilarious antagonist only to criminally underuse him.
That's kind of a running theme of Season 6. Half the time it feels like some storylines are getting stretched on a little long, while the other half it feels like they were setting something up and clearly wanted to do more of it, but they just didn't have the time to actually do that. Jeremiah White Whale feels like the logical end boss for Diane to face off against, and if he was introduced earlier, or if there was a 7th season, I'm sure they absolutely would have used him even more. But because this is the end, we have to wrap up, and they don't have time. So he just feels like a funny footnote in Diane's story.
Oh well, missed potential in future episodes aside, this was a really engaging episode about Diane and Guy facing off against the CEO of capitalism and ultimately coming up short because, yeah, no, how are you gonna beat the CEO of capitalism? It's impossible, life sucks. But yeah, great episode. One other thing I really like about it is how interspersed throughout are voiced over letters from BoJack, where he's writing to Diane about his time in rehab. But she's not reading them. BoJack's just talking to the void since Diane is moving on with her life. Going to new places, being with a new guy, and just finally leaving BoJack and her LA self behind after all this time. Then, at the end of the episode, she gets home to LA and finally reads one of BoJack's letters. Presumably the one that's currently being voiced over about how BoJack wasted so many years being miserable because he assumed that it was the only way to be. She then sighs and calls someone on the phone. BoJack, obviously, right? It's time for her to reconnect with him and get back to her usual old life. Nope! It's Guy. She's calling to imply that she wants to live where he lives, and we don't see her respond to BoJack's letters at all. It's a great subversive scene that shows exactly where Diane's headspace is at the time, and how it's probably for the best that she moves on from her negative experiences in LA, even if it means that it might be time to say goodbye to BoJack. Also, another thing I liked about this episode is that they went to the Art Institute. I actually went there with my girlfriend recently and we saw this funny Amogus statue that caused both of us to go blind.
It's true! James still can't see anything, even right now. I've typed all of this myself. He needs to pay me more, like giving me a 6-month advance on a video I have no intention of actually making. Just like Diane! After a miscommunication from Princess Carolyn over the phone, Diane now has to write a whole ass book in 6 months. Easy peasy kidney squeezy. Unfortunately, she keeps procrastinating on writing the book. Instead, she does literally everything she can possibly do that isn't the book. Like doing the dishes, cleaning the apartment, helping Todd steal his kidney back so he can give it to his mom, and arguing about Dawson's Creek with Guy. Relatable! The real reason behind all of this is that Diane is suffering from depression, making it hard to start writing. And yet Mr. Peanutbutter is the one who's the national face to depression. Her therapist even goes and prescribes her antidepressants to help. Ironically, the book is about her depression and trauma, so she opts not to take the medicine because, well, golly gee willikers, how can I write about depression if I'm not actually depressed? Which, for the record, Michael Crichton never brought dinosaurs back from the dead, but he still wrote about that. Diane, you can still write about your past struggles even if you aren't currently struggling with them. The big change occurs when BoJack visits her in Chicago, while Guy is on a work trip in the Galapagos. As the biggest source of irony ever, BoJack is the one who lays it all out for Diane that she needs to take the medicine. Now, given that BoJack at this point is out of rehab and has already gotten his help, it isn't all that unexpected that he's capable of telling her the right thing to do in this situation, but after 5 seasons of BoJack shenanigans, seeing BoJack be the one to push Diane in the right direction for once is wild. Diane's main argument is that she's worried Guy wouldn't be able to handle the real her once she's on meds, but BoJack recalls a recent conversation he had with someone who told him essentially, BoJack, you ruin everything, and that's how you'll always be. This is the exact belief BoJack himself had for decades, but now hearing it be said out loud for once to see how dumb that really is. Holding these negative beliefs about himself is a big part of why it took so long for BoJack to get help and actually change. You have to actually let yourself change in order to do so. And with that, Diane understands what she has to do. So she starts taking the meds and seems to genuinely be better off. And with a quick jab at the teen drama I've only ever seen referenced in Family Guy, Diane is done for the first half of the show. So we're done with PC, PB, Todd, and Diane. That leaves one major player left for the first half of the show. I wonder who that could be.
Character actress Margot Martindale? Oh wait, no, she's not back till episode 8 and we haven't gotten there yet. Damn it. Let's talk about BoJack now. It's obviously about time that he goes to rehab, and it's pretty clear that it is helping him. But to be honest, I don't really think there's a lot to say about his plotline during the first half of the season. Aside from the strong first episode, which we already covered, there's not a ton of momentum with his character here, and we're just kind of hearing the same things that we already know about him. His time in rehab is often shoved to the side during most of Season 6 Part 1, in order to make way for episodes focused on the side characters. Now, you could make a strong argument that this was intentional. BoJack's plotline obviously won't have a lot of momentum because he's taking time off and trying to better himself, so it makes sense that the side characters do a lot of the heavy lifting. But as a side effect, it makes the first half of Season 6 feel kind of unfocused. BoJack doesn't feel like the main character since the season doesn't really center around him yet. And while I wouldn't say his plotline in this first half is too slow or aimless, I would say it's just kind of repetitive. We do learn a couple interesting new things about him, like the fact that he has some sort of internalized hatred of horses thanks to his parents, but that's one of the only tidbits that really stuck with me throughout his time in rehab. Well, that and Mario.
One important thematic element is the vodka water bottle BoJack got in the first episode. It serves as a visually distinct reminder to BoJack of his past and what he's trying to get away from. And yeah, that's the bulk of BoJack's journey for the first half of the season. His storyline is used to facilitate and introduce events happening in the other storylines, like Joey Pogo's introduction, or the start of the assistant strike. Since BoJack is getting sidelined a bit here, this is a smart thing to do. You can't have BoJack learn the same lesson every single episode, but you need to keep him in the show since it's his show. So you use him to subtly affect the other characters' stories. BoJack's big struggle is that after months of routine, he begins to like rehab a little too much and doesn't want to leave and go back to the outside world. His interactions with Dr. Champ highlight this. By the end, Dr. Champ just wanted BoJack to acknowledge he was fine and ready to go. Dr. Champ would let him stay longer if he could give him a solid reason why he has to stay. And there is one, but BoJack skips over it every single time it comes up. His relationship with his parents. BoJack, being a stubborn horse, keeps shaking it off. So, of course, for the next good while, Dr. Champ is basically going around trying to get BoJack to leave.
Get out right fucking now!
They even try outright kicking him out and giving the room to Joey Pogo, but BoJack tricks Joey into leaving. Classic BoJack. Oh, also he accidentally causes the big assistant strike after Todd sends Casey over to be his friend. Oof. All this comes to a head when Dr. Champ demands BoJack to leave and pack his bags. BoJack angrily tries to sip the vodka bottle, but quickly stops himself and finally throws the bottle away. Unfortunately, he literally throws it away, out the window, and it falls into a crate of other water bottles. In a stroke of irony, Dr. Champ is the one who gets his hands on it and becomes a horrible drunk. Lamau. After hiding Dr. Champ for a little bit until he sobers up, BoJack finally leaves Facetious and is on his way home when he sees Dr. Champ's car parked outside the bar. He goes in to investigate, and of course the therapy horse is off his rocker. While the two are arguing, they finally get to one of BoJack's biggest issues. He is stunted from having healthy relationships with other horses due to his relationship with his parents. Every other horse either reminds him of his mom or dad, seeking validation from them while also rejecting it and using it as an excuse to resent them even more. Or they remind him of himself. This of course means BoJack hates himself because of his hatred of horses and believes that because he is a horse himself, he deserves to be punished. Cue 50 plus years of self-sabotage, and here we are today. To cut to the chase, Dr. Champ passes out and BoJack checks him into a different rehab center right next door to Facetious. Dr. Champ then, as his last words, BoJack tells him he ruins everything. This is the interaction I mentioned with Diane earlier. This scene is a good note to end on. We've seen scenes like this play out multiple times. Herb, Charlotte, Todd. Here it's thrown on its head a little. While yes, BoJack did ruin Dr. Champ here, he was also kind of in the right to check him in to get help. Champ is the one who chose to go to the bar in the first place. BoJack at least tried to help. Dr. Champ ends by telling BoJack he wants him to remember this whole ordeal, which BoJack says he will, but this is less him saying it to Dr. Champ as it is himself. BoJack is sober. He is no longer running away from his problems. He will remember this, and Herb, and Charlotte, Sarah Lynn, Penny, everything. This is the last step BoJack really needed to take to be able to move on and grow.
Episode 7, The Face of Depression, is where BoJack's storyline really starts to hook me again. He's back home and he feels incredible remorse for all the horrible things he's done here, so he decides to leave and try and find himself by visiting his friends across the country. There's not really a ton to analyze with this one, since it's basically just the natural culmination of BoJack trying to change himself for the better over the course of the season so far. He's out of rehab and ready to reconnect with everyone in his life who cares about him, starting with a nice simple conversation with Todd at a diner. He realizes that he wants to follow the example of a flight attendant he met at an AA meeting, and wake up in a different place every day. So he hops on his first of many flights in the episode, this one being to Illinois to see Diane! One small detail I really like is how Diane is just sitting on her couch eating a bag of chips and just casually watching Mr. Peanutbutter's ad about depression. Like, I love how there's just no reaction on her face while watching her super jovial and cheerful ex-husband spreading the word about depression. She's not confused or concerned or offended. This is just a completely normal thing for her to be watching. I just thought that was really funny. Anyway, William already discussed the great scene that occurs here where BoJack convinces her to take her meds. He also thanks her for believing in him even when he didn't. And it's just such a great and conclusive moment for the two of them. It feels like you could end the story of their friendship at this scene, and it would be incredibly profound and meaningful. It's almost like this is the theme of the episode, and that everything here feels pretty conclusive and that it would make for a great finale, huh? I wonder if the show will subvert that notion. Anyway, where's BoJack headed next? Why? To Connecticut, home of Lou's Owl House, and also the place Marty wanted to go in Madagascar. Also, Hollyhock is there. She's happy to see him, but also a little upset that he gave no advance notice he was coming. And he's kinda just along for the ride when Hollyhock tries to console her friend by taking her to a shitty concert she likes. There's a bit of foreshadowing for the second half of the season here, with Hollyhock having her own life that BoJack isn't a part of, becoming a more prominent source of conflict between the two later on.
BoJack also finds out Wesleyan is cutting their theater department because the previous professor in charge quit after being cast in a regional commercial. This puts the idea in his head to consider a career change. After this, he's already run out of people across the country to visit, so he goes back to LA to meet with Princess Carolyn. BoJack is in the process of getting rid of everything that reminds him of his past self, so he gets rid of the painting that was in his office and gives it to Princess Carolyn as a baby shower gift. BoJack does not know what a baby shower is. The baby is not supposed to be alive yet, you cretin.
Okay, first of all, it's creep.
Anyway, BoJack gets Princess Carolyn to be a reference for a job recommendation. She agrees, and he is on his way. Also, Rufy ruins the painting, Lamau. 2 months pass, and we see BoJack has been regularly attending Alcohol Anonymous meetings, and despite how long it's been, he's still haunted by his past mistakes while in his house. This manages to get Sharona to empathize with him, and the two start talking again. This starts a nice subplot where, for the rest of the episode, BoJack's outfit and design changes. Sharona offers to cut his hair, revealing that he's been dyeing it this whole time. After this, we now see see BoJack with a full head of gray hair. He looks much more mature with this new look, and it doesn't stop there. Throughout the rest of the episode, parts of BoJack's outfit will either get ruined as a result of wacky hijinks, or replaced as he adapts to his new surroundings. A subtle way of showing that BoJack has indeed changed as a person. Not just mentally, but we see it physically as well. This episode really does a good job reinforcing what we saw earlier, that BoJack truly is capable of change and moving on with his life. I mean, he's had the exact same outfit for years, from like at least 2007 all the way through the first 6.5 seasons of the show. The fact that only now is his regular design changing shows that this change is probably gonna stick. And that all starts to literally show here thanks to Sharona. Yeah, Sharona. Who's Sharona? Okay, rewind. Okay, so back in the 90s, Sharona was BoJack's hair and makeup woman on Horsing Around. She gave him all of his haircuts throughout Herb's run on the show. One day, the two butt heads and run out of the room arguing. Sarah Lynn is also there and manages to get her hands on the bottle of vodka BoJack had been drinking. This results in BoJack getting called in by the new showrunner, Danny Bananas, to figure out how she got the vodka. They agree to use Sharona as the fall guy so that BoJack doesn't get fired. This is why Sharona gave him the cold shoulder earlier in the episode. I know we kinda went out of order here on this part, but we've been going out of order for this whole video anyway, and I already wrote all that other stuff and didn't want to go back and rewrite shit, so fuck you, I'm doing it now.
Anyway, during his next flight, BoJack gets grounded in Washington, D.C. due to icy weather. This is a friendly reminder that winter sucks. Fall is the best season and you all know it. But while he's here, he runs into Mr. Penis Man, who's addressing Congress all about depression and stuff. This is one of the least weird things he's ever done over the course of the series. They visit the Smithsonian together to see BoJack's original Horsing Around sweater, right next to the set of Mr. Peanutbutter's house. And it's here that BoJack initiates one of the most wholesome and heartwarming scenes in the entire series. The crossover episode Mr. Peanutbutter always wanted. Once again, if this doesn't scream perfect final interaction between these two characters, I don't know what does. The old BoJack would never do something like this for a guy he doesn't even like, so it's rather beautiful that he would give Mr. Peanutbutter this nice little act of kindness. Speaking of which, there's this quirky bunny girl working at Cinnabunny, who BoJack keeps running into at the airport. He slowly starts to pick up that she's asexual and a very fitting match for Todd, so he recommends Todd's asexual dating app to her. He really didn't need to do that, there's no personal gain in it for him, but he figured he might as well as a kindness to both her and Todd. Again, the old BoJack wouldn't even have listened to what she was saying and would only be concerned with why his order was taking so long. I think this legitimately selfless little gesture of his is a great sign of his growth as a person. The episode starts wrapping up by showing where everyone's at, and it's all pretty positive stuff. Todd gets a match with Maud the Bunny Girl, PC offers Judah a prestigious job at her firm, Mr. Peanutbutter enjoys being depressed and doesn't mind Pickle sleeping with 32 guys, and Diane reunites with Guy and seems to be doing okay with her actual depression. The meds made her gain some weight, but the show doesn't make a big deal out of that or anything, which is nice. Not everything is perfectly resolved for these characters, but it's not a bad place to leave them off at. And the same can be said for BoJack.
The episode ends with BoJack finding God. We did not figure out who's voicing either of these, so I'm just gonna do bad impressions of both. I'm sorry for what you're about to hear.
Hello, my child. I see you have made great strides in bettering yourself. You have made me very happy, my child.
Thank you, Father. I can't do a BoJack voice or Will Arnett impression. This is the best I got or some shit. I don't fucking know!
Unfortunately, you still tried to have sex with a 17-year-old, so...
Little boy, you're going to hell!
Okay, but seriously, while in DC, he picks up a pamphlet for Old Town Horseburg and visits the next day to view a reenactment of a 1700s-style horse church service. He shakes hands with other horses and finds solace in the show. It's nice to see him find peace with other horses, considering how he talked to Dr. Champ about having an internalized hatred of horses earlier. He is told that if he wishes to stay there, they start over in another 30 minutes. A nice ending to BoJack's journey for the first half of the show, showing him finding inner peace for once in his life. Unfortunately for him, we also start over in 30 minutes. This works as a faux finale. If you wanted BoJack to end the show as a changed man and finally find happiness, this is the point where that happens. You can stop watching now if that's what you wanted to see. If you found solace in their show, like BoJack did, you can just start over now and end the overall journey here. but otherwise we have to keep going. On to episode 8, the mid-season finale. This episode is unique because none of the main principal cast show up. No BoJack, no Todd, PC, nothing. Instead, we follow a variety of side characters, including 2 brand new ones, Paige Sinclair and Maximilian Bakes, the 3rd and 4th best characters in the show. They are 2 Southern Fried reporters looking for the next big scoop. And a scoop they get when Sarah Lynn's mother comes on knocking asking if someone would look into her daughter's case. So the 2 go around Hollywood looking for clues. They'll be very important later on, but first let's start with characters we know. Starting with
the number 1 best character actress Margot Martindale! Oh, and also number 2 is Judah, in case you were wondering. Anyway, I always kind of thought this was a haha funny opening to the episode, showing character actress Margot Martindale stealing a car and then escaping the coven she's been at for the last 2 years, only for her to not show up in the rest of the episode. Just a cute little funny joke before we get to some sad shit. But actually, I only just now noticed how important this opening scene with her is in terms of setting up the themes for this episode. Margot Martindale expresses how haunted she is by her past, and the thoughts of the people she's hurt and the lives she's ruined. The other nun tries to tell her that confessing her sins is good enough to wash them clean, but Margot doesn't want to close herself off from the fates of others, and expresses concern for the lives she's ruined. It then turns out she was just acting as she steals a car and drives off. So I guess her little subplot at this nunnery didn't really go anywhere narratively, but at least we got this potent opening scene that cleverly foreshadows what this episode will be about. The lives BoJack has ruined. We follow some of the various women over the course of the series who BoJack has left a detrimental impact on in some way. These being Kelsey, Hollyhock, and Gina, with a lot of references to Penny thrown in over the course of Paige and Max's investigation. This episode is easily my favorite out of the first 8 in season 6, showcasing that even though we hadn't seen them in a while, life still went on for these women after BoJack, and it didn't go as smoothly for them as you might assume.
I guess we should go character to character again like earlier. Let's start with Kelsey. We haven't seen her since season 3. Kelsey has been struggling trying to get new projects off the ground in the age of the superhero blockbuster. She had her shot with BoJack to get an Oscar picture, but we all know how that went, and it's been rough ever since. After talking to fellow director Justin Kenyon and big-time Hollywood agent Sonic the Hedgehog, she manages to score a meeting with Not Marvel to direct a superhero blockbuster. And the hero is gay. Based! It's nice to see Kelsey finally succeed again after BoJack broke into the Nixon Museum and got her fired. BoJack and his crew did all of that, and yet she is the only one who got screwed over. That's kind of the point of the episode, to remind us that yes, BoJack has changed, but he still did very real damage. So we get some follow-ups on the people that he's hurt before, including some you probably forgot about. Kelsey's quick story ends with her looking for her lead actress, to which she is led to...
Gina has not been doing well since the BoJack strangling incident. We see her filming a movie directed by Kelsey's friend Justin, where she's a lot more paranoid and much more of a wreck than she was when we last saw her. She freaks out over suddenly receiving new script pages because it's too much of a surprise, and then constantly expresses how much respect she deserves with her being number 1 on the call sheet. Especially considering how she's a much easier person to work with compared to the last number 1 on the call sheet she had. When confronted about what issues she might be going through, she doesn't want to talk about it. It's obviously completely understandable why she would be like this and why she doesn't want to open up about what she went through. But unfortunately, since no one understands her perspective, they all just see her as an irritable diva who's hard to work with. Her scene partner dances with her and improvises a dip where he holds her neck with his hand. And that brings back a lot of unwanted trauma, causing her to freak out on set and leave before they're done filming. To an outsider, it does look like Gina's being unreasonable and overreacting. But knowing what we know about her, and what the rest of the world can't know, it makes perfect sense why she'd be like this. It's genuinely really sad that the emotional scars BoJack inflicted on her are still lingering. And tragically enough, it's in this scene where we get the one and only F-bomb of the season, as well as the final one in the whole series. Gina's scene partner asks her, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" The exact same thing she asked BoJack after being choked. This shows that by harming her, BoJack kicked off a chain reaction that causes Gina to harm the people around her. She started acting outwardly arrogant and ditching her scheduled shoots in a similar manner to BoJack. So who's to say that she also won't eventually turn to alcohol or drugs in order to cope with her trauma? Furthermore, using the F-bomb on a side character like Gina messing up a relationship rather than tying it to one of BoJack's relationships like the previous 5 seasons, shows us that the consequences of BoJack's actions will continue to affect other people, regardless of whether he's personally moved past his sins or not.
The saddest scene of all in Gina's plotline here comes when Kelsey is talking to Justin about finding an actress to lead her superhero film. She asks about Gina, and while Justin is trying to play up her talents as an actress, Kelsey's questions about her personality on set lead Justin to admit that he doesn't recommend her. He notes that it was great working with her a few years ago and that he doesn't know what happened that changed her, before recommending Courtney Portnoy to Kelsey, who gives a positive response. It's so upsetting to see Gina potentially passed up for this opportunity for reasons that neither Kelsey nor Justin understand. It's really upsetting because someone as progressive as Kelsey would probably be incredibly supportive of Gina if she knew what the problem was, and would likely want to cast her. But since nobody does know what's going on, she just follows the rest of the world in assuming that it's just typical diva behavior. In sharp contrast to Kelsey bouncing back from the career setback BoJack inflicted on her, it's evident from this scene that Gina might not bounce back for a long time, if at all. Though I might as well mention now that in the finale, we can see on a billboard that Gina has indeed been cast in the lead role in Kelsey's movie, which is at least a good omen for her future.
Anyway, let's talk Hawk. Hollyhock. Yeah, shut up, I'm clever. Hollyhock and her friends go to New York City while on winter break. She really wants to go to a party, but keeps making excuses to delay actually being there. We're told that she really wants to drink and party, but her friend Tawny reminds her that she says this every time she goes to a party, but never actually drinks. This is because she wants to experience peer pressure and be offered a drink, but she's also afraid of losing control if she drinks. Gee golly gee, I wonder why she's worried about getting drunk and losing control. Yeah, she is clearly still affected by what happened in LA in both season 4 and 5. Showing that even an ongoing, overall positive relationship that BoJack has with someone doesn't change the fact that they were negatively affected by him entering their life. Eventually, when they do go, she suffers from an anxiety attack, but is taken care of by a man named Pierre. The two go out to get air and start talking about their past struggles with alcohol. And this is when we realize this isn't just some dude. This is goddamn motherfucking Pete Repeat from season 2, and Hollyhock finds out about the prom night incident. Not the almost sleeping with Penny part, but the everything else part. Up until now, she's heard the stories about BoJack, but aside from the scare in season 5, he's never done anything directly to her. She's only knew him while he was on his path to better himself. But now the image of BoJack she's known these past 3 seasons is challenged by one of the very people he's directly hurt. And in the exact way Hollyhock has been terrified of this whole time. This is also the ending of the episode. It cuts off right as Peter says his name.
Go back to the 90s!
But you know what happens without them having to show it. It's a very strong finish, because Hollyhock is BoJack's link to his new life as Wesleyan, and it's already being challenged in a way he never would have guessed. Especially because most of us forgot Pete fucking existed.
Whoops!
Even though BoJack's ready to leave the past behind and continue growing as a person, it's clear that his past will never truly go away and will continue to harm him and his reputation going forward. Which brings us to the second half of the season. Yeah, Netflix released this final season in 2 separate parts a couple of months away from each other, ending the first half of the season off rather ominously with Peter telling Hollyhock about BoJack's shady actions. A perfect indication of the driving conflict of the second half of the season. Before we get into that, I do want to briefly talk about how the first half of season 6 was not really the best on its own. At times, it can feel a little aimless and like there's no central plotline, probably because BoJack can't really drive the story forward while he's in rehab. It is nice to give more focus to the side characters since giving them more development was definitely welcome, but for the most part, the first half of this season kinda just feels like setup for the second half. I felt this way when it first aired on its own, and I still feel this way even though the payoff for said setup is available to watch right afterwards. Yeah, you could argue that the season is a bit of a slow burn in that regard, but I don't know. Considering how heavy the focus is on BoJack himself in the final few episodes, it makes the first half of the season feel even more meandering in hindsight, since very little of it is actually centered on BoJack. This is the main reason I consider it to be the second weakest season of the show. It just doesn't have the same tight central plotline as seasons 2 through 5. Until we get to the second half, that is. Most of the second half of season 6 is definitely on par with the previous seasons, so I'll be a lot more positive going forward with this video.
Speaking of being positive, let's talk about Surfshark VPN. Picture this. You're trying to watch the hit TV show Filbert, which aired on the now defunct WhatTimeIsItRightNow.com and has now been added to Netflix.
Wait, didn't you do this bit for the sponsor transition in the last video?
Who cares? Anyway, let's say Filbert is only available on Netflix in Australia. What are us Americans supposed to do to access this geo-restricted content? Simple, sis! With Surfshark, you can trick your browser into thinking you're in another country, thus allowing you to access content you couldn't get otherwise. Do you want alerts every time your WhatTimeIsItRightNow.com account password is compromised? Surfshark can help with that. Surfshark Alert scans various databases of leaked information and notifies its users if their data is found so they can take action, which is an absolutely invaluable feature. Surfshark is also totally unlimited, meaning you can use it on as many devices as you like, even all at the same time. No other VPN allows this. Go to surfshark.deal/Rillis and enter promo code Rillis to get 83% off and 3 extra months of Surfshark VPN for free. It's an amazing deal, and it's even better because it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're not satisfied, you can cancel during those 30 days and get your money back. If you're looking for a great VPN, there's no reason not to give Surfshark a try. Once again, head to surfshark.deal/Rillis and enter the promo code Rillis. Have a great time with Surfshark VPN.
The second half starts with an episode all about BoJack's new life as a professor at Wesleyan. We see him adjusting to his new life in academia and bonding with his students whether he likes it or not. He has a good 5 months to whip these aspiring student actors into shape while maintaining his relationship with Hollyhock, which to his surprise is starting to show some cracks. We see him going to regular AA meetings, which now are constantly being interrupted by students trying to impress him and failing horribly at it. Well, except for one student who actually does have issues, but BoJack didn't know that. Whoopsie! BoJack gets a lot of time to shine in this episode, which was greatly needed after the first half sidelined him hard. We don't really cut back to LA in this episode. BoJack gets a call from PB so we can offload Elefante to him, and PC visits him to give his class a lecture about the business side of Hollywood, but that's it. This part does give us an interesting dynamic with the two we haven't seen yet. Princess Carolyn tries to sign a student, but BoJack has to be the responsible one and get her off his case. He knows what happens to young actors and the risks that you take when becoming a big-time actor, and does not want the kid to go down the path he did. Of course, he fails to convince him because Hollywood is Hollywood. But hey, BoJack tried to do the right thing. Gold stars all around. Meanwhile, BoJack is also trying to be there for Hollyhock, getting super invested in a rugby team and going to all of her games. But Hollyhock seems like she wants nothing to do with him. BoJack doesn't know why yet, but we do. Now that she's met Peter, someone who was directly affected by BoJack's actions, she sees that there really was weight to her father's warnings in the past, and is much more cautious of BoJack overall. Also, she has a blue hoodie.
To me, the deterioration of BoJack and Hollyhock's relationship is one of the most tragic things not only in this episode, but also the season at large. Yeah, they're blood siblings, but as Hollyhock pointed out, they had different, completely separate lives for so many years. And her talk with Peter was her first wake-up call to the fact that the life BoJack has been living has not been a particularly good one. Even though he wants to put that all behind him, her apprehension to him suddenly inserting himself into a major part of her life is completely understandable. Hell, it would be understandable for her to feel this way without knowing the story she heard from Peter. But with it, it's incredibly clear why this is an uncomfortable situation for her. The final nail in the coffin is when, after missing the scene study BoJack's class is putting on, and laying her feelings and concerns out on the table, she mentions how, despite being in a fight with her friend Tawny, she still loves her. BoJack then asks, "Are we in a fight?" To which she responds, "Yeah, but," stopping herself before saying that she loves BoJack. It harkens all the way back to season 1, when Diane was unable to call BoJack a good person when put on the spot about it. And it stands out here as a really deliberate way of cementing the fracture that this relationship is experiencing. And I didn't even notice until this rewatch, but this is their last scene together. This is the last time we see these two characters directly interacting. Ouch. But this overall great and entertaining episode isn't all doom and gloom. Todd has an entire subplot where he accidentally eats a marshmallow meant for Ruthie, meaning he has to scientifically create a new marshmallow and then wins the school for passing the test. Except no, that wasn't actually Willy Wonka Wesleyan, that was just a guy on LSD. I think I like this little escapade so much because it feels like a season 1 or 2 Todd adventure, plucked straight out of there and into the final season. And that's fun, it's a great little throwback. The side story also establishes that Todd started dating the bunny girl Maud, which is nice.
The episode ends with his students performing their selected scenes for the final in front of an audience, and the night goes off without a hitch. They're not great, but they're a bunch of 19-year-olds, so it checks out. Did I do anything valuable at 19? No, of course not. But 27, now that's the magic number. I'm 26. The performance wraps up and everyone seems super happy, giving BoJack a happy ending to his first semester at Wesleyan University. Ah, fuck. So out of nowhere, Charlotte, after literal years, calls BoJack. The utter shock of it sends BoJack into, well, shock. As luck would have it, the reporters we spent the previous episode with are on his trail and they are asking Penny for answers, just in case it has anything to do with Sarah Lynn. It's an unrelated story, but they don't know that. Despite all the changes BoJack has made the past year, truly bettering himself, no matter what he does, he cannot run from his past, and his past has finally caught up with him. At this point, we're at the edge of our seats waiting for the aftermath of this monumental event. So anyway, here's the Babysitters Club. Diane is struggling to write her new book, but no matter how hard she tries, she is unable to turn any of her invasive thoughts and past damage into anything coherent. Even after taking her antidepressants so she can focus on her writing, she still struggles with creating the actual content. This episode is actually very relatable for content creators. Diane feels the need to write about her past and issues because it's what she knows and is expected of her, but she doesn't actually have any ideas about how to make content out of it. Additionally, the big reason for doing this in the first place is so that she can rationalize all her past damage. If she doesn't write this book, that means her damage wasn't good damage, it was just damage. It didn't make her grow, it just hurt her.
Now that's a lot of damage!
But sometimes that's all it is. There are times where you get hurt and need time to process and heal, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be good damage. You are more than what happens to you. It doesn't need to be your brand. Diane may have spent her career talking about BoJack's damage and her own, but sometimes you don't want or need to do that. Sometimes you just need to do something fun. Do projects you actually enjoy. Write that middle school mystery series you've been shopping around. And also to the creators out there who feel pigeonholed into making just one kind of thing, if you do have an idea that you want to do, but feel like you can't do it because it's not your brand, have some goddamn fun for once in a while. Do what makes you happy. I mean, look at James. He made a video about Moulin Rouge, and nobody's cared about Moulin Rouge for like 10 years, but that didn't stop him.
Wait, what? But yeah, I think this episode is really special, and it really spoke to me for a number of reasons. It can be really hard to tap into traumatic personal experiences when writing, and it makes perfect sense that Diane wants to share those experiences with the world and help other people in similar situations. But she doesn't feel mentally equipped to do that sort of self-reflection at the moment, and that's okay. Processing shitty things that happened to you in the past can take a lot of time, and writing about those experiences can take even longer. There's no shame in that whatsoever, and sometimes it can be beneficial to write or create something more lighthearted and fun. That sort of experience is just as valuable and can speak to and inspire people just as much as something heavy and personal. And inspiration can strike you from anywhere, like how Diane overhears an employee named Ivy talking about a mall-related mystery and subconsciously forms a desire to write one herself. It's such a realistic little detail. I can't tell you all the times I've been inspired to think up stories and characters based on random occurrences in everyday life. Plus, that's not even getting into the stellar, creative animation of this episode. Diane's crude, loose sketches as she tries to write her book of essays are so fluid and well realized, reflecting her mindset and the uncertainty she feels about it. It then serves as a great contrast to how fully featured and colored in the Ivy trans story elements are, while also serving as a parallel to BoJack's intrusive thoughts in Season 4's Stupid Piece of Shit. On top of her writing struggles, we see Diane stop taking her antidepressants and gradually break down throughout the episode, and it's harrowing to see her at probably her lowest points in the entire series. It really makes you appreciate how supportive and understanding Guy is throughout the process, however, always being there to console her and help her through it. And ultimately, it's nice to see Princess Carolyn go from pushy and mildly antagonistic over the course of the episode to legitimately helpful to Diane by the end, offering great advice and telling her that Ivy Tran, food court detective, will inspire and be treasured by young girls, even if Diane doesn't believe so. I think as time has gone on, I've grown to appreciate Diane's storyline in Season 6 more and more, to the point where this might be my favorite season for her character. We finally get a sufficient amount of focus on just her, rather than viewing everything through the lens of her interactions with BoJack or Mr. Peanutbutter. Seeing her grapple with all the terrible things that happened to her growing up and trying to move past them, while also coming to terms with her inability to write about these issues, is really compelling stuff. And I'm glad we got this for her at the very end of the show.
Also during this episode, we get some quick cuts to Penny, our two Southern fried reporters, and Charlotte. Basically, they're on the case, and get just enough information out of Penny to connect BoJack to Sarah Lynn. Penny now also has the opportunity to go to the press with her story and nail BoJack for what happened all those years ago. However, Charlotte, knowing that the story could also potentially expose what happened between her and BoJack, and also to protect Penny from more wandering eyes, persuades her not to. This is where Penny's story ends. BoJack never will face consequences for what happened in New Mexico all those years ago, but we do know how heavy it weighs on his conscience and, of course, the victims. I also want to give a shout out to Kyle, Charlotte's husband. Dude's just a guy. This is the most guy-ass guy that ever dared to guy. He's more of a guy than the guy actually named Guy. Listen to him watching TV. Hear the pure enjoyment in his voice as he watches the comical journey of Birthday Dad.
Don't go over the dateline, Birthday Dad, because then it won't be your birthday anymore.
Is this how normal people watch TV? I wish I could have feelings like him again. Okay, so getting back to important stuff, this episode wraps up with Charlotte getting out her phone and calling up our old buddy BoJack. And you know how this ends, it's the exact same way last episode ended. The next episode shows us the aftermath, where BoJack and his friends try to figure out what the hell happened and why reporters are getting involved. So we got a fun final season walk down memory lane with all the shitty things BoJack did over the past 5.5 seasons. This means BoJack has to come clean to everyone there about what happened in New Mexico. The cat is finally out of the bag, but it's okay because the cat is also right next to him. PC's on his side. Of course, since nothing illegal actually happened, Princess Carolyn and BoJack are quick to jump to telling them nothing, since he didn't technically do anything wrong. And yes, as we've been told countless times, he legally is in the clear for Penny. Morally, it was not okay, and Diane is naturally frustrated at them. As the episode goes on, Todd and Diane leave the office as a result of the events, but Princess Carolyn, the one who's been with BoJack the longest in his life, stays by his side. She can't leave, she needs to stay and help, because, well, she's been there all this time, why quit now? You know, sunk costs and all that. Sunk cost fallacy is a real thing in real life. If you're not enjoying the new Pokemon games anymore, you can stop playing them. It's okay, you have nothing to prove. Play something you do enjoy, you stupid fuck.
I should also mention that one thing I like about the first scene in the episode is how BoJack is finally ready to confess the Penny story to the other main characters. Those being Diane, PC, and Todd. We're not missing anybody, especially nobody who would talk to any reporters. Oh. Yeah, that's a simultaneously funny and ominous cold open. So we get to see Paige and Max working their usual magic as they try and get something out of Mr. Pina Colada at his new and improved Elefante. I kind of find it funny that BoJack bought the restaurant in season 1 as a way of one-upping Mr. Peanut Butter, and then in the end, Mr. Peanut Butter ended up owning it. That's a cute detail. Anyway, Mr. Peanut Butter is joint running the place with Joey, Pogo, and Pickles. Oh, we're still doing this plotline, are we? At this point, did anyone really want Mr. Peanut Butter and Pickles to stay together? I feel like they just kind of dragged this relationship out because they didn't have anything else for Mr. Peanut Butter to do in these final few episodes. As this episode progresses, we gradually see Pickles and Joey Pogo falling in love. And this would be as good a time as any to end the Peanut Butter Pickles relationship. But no, they insist that they'll get married after Pickles comes back from Joey Pogo's big music tour. And then, in a literal throwaway line in the next episode, Mr. Peanut Butter receives a text that he and Pickles are broken up forever. Having him announce that the relationship is over so nonchalantly was a cute way for the writers to acknowledge that nobody cared about this relationship at this point. But at the same time, why was it so dragged out? It's easily one of the season's most boring plot lines. One that peaked with the already flawed surprise and never really found its footing again afterwards. At the very least, the precarious Pickles Pogo Peanut Butter plight produces a potent plug-in for Paige's plucky problem. She and Max argue about who's in the right in the Joey Pickle situation, and it becomes evident that their arguments are just metaphors for their own situation. So at least the boring couple dispute was able to contribute to the sexual tension plotline that's actually fun to watch. Like, I know they're antagonists just looking for a hot scoop, but I genuinely wanted to see Paige and Max get together in the end. 'Twasn't meant to be though. How tragic.
Eventually, the reporters do call him directly, and they learn that the story is actually about Sarah Lynn and not Penny. This destroys BoJack because Sarah Lynn's death is his single biggest regret. The room falls silent as this revelation is made. BoJack leaves at one point to announce superlatives to his students and a rousing speech about the semester. A perfect contrast between the wonderful professor he became and the sad horse that did big nopes the rest of his life. BoJack and PC begin to write a statement to address the situation and fix everything, but eventually BoJack scraps it because he knows it's all bullshit. On the one hand, BoJack truly has moved on and bettered himself, so why is this all coming out now? On the other hand, deep down he still knows that he deserves this, and frankly he himself has even advocated for takedowns like this before, like in Season 5 when he asked Diane to write one herself. In the end, they let the news come out.
Overall, an excellent episode that's filled with so much dread for what's about to happen, mixed in perfectly with some lighthearted moments in the B-plot for good measure. However, now it's time for Xerox of a Xerox, the episode where it all goes wrong. Let's talk about some non-BoJack related things first. First of all, as I said earlier, Pickles and Mr. Peanutbutter are done. They just dropped this info super casually on us because they know we don't care, so that's cool, let's move on. Turns out Paige's accent is inauthentic because her family's from Fresno. That's really funny actually. Diane meets Guy's son, Sonny, which took way longer for us to get the joke for than we'd like to admit. It's nice to see their relationship advancing to this point, even though things aren't going too well between Diane and Sonny at first. Todd and Maud decide to move in together, which is nice because it's the first time in the whole series Todd gets a permanent home of his own. And in addition, Diane and Todd are both asked by their romantic partners if they want to watch the BoJack interviews on TV. And they both give very similar answers of not really being interested in seeing more of BoJack, since they got their fill of him and his toxic behavior already, and they don't think he'll be particularly genuine in his interviews. This is a good follow-up to the fact that they both left BoJack's office early in the previous episode, rather than stick with him to the end and try and figure out how he gets past these allegations. They've both moved on with their lives and don't want to deal with him anymore. But Princess Carolyn is here to stay, both at his office trying to come up with a plan and helping him throughout the entire interview process. Which I guess we'd better start talking about.
Today on Oprah, we have a wonderful interview with BoJack, and it goes super well. Because the whole thing is bullshit. Braxby does feel-good stories, so she helps steer things in a way that lets BoJack essentially both come clean and get away with it. Nothing BoJack says is untrue, but he faces little to no pushback on anything he says. To highlight how fake the interview is, they say at the beginning that they're doing it live at his house. This is a lie. They are on the Filbert set that just looks like his house. This is the daytime television equivalent of Marvel green screening a bar. Wait, do Marvel shows technically count as daytime television now? BoJack ends the interview apologizing live on TV to Sarah Lynn's mother, and comes off completely sympathetic. As a result, America loves BoJack. He gets to keep his professor job and lives happily ever after. The end. Back in the 90s. So anyway, Paige Sinclair gives Bragsby a bunch of the information she has, and BoJack decides to do a second interview after talking to Pinky, because Pinky always has good ideas. I wonder if this second interview goes well. So BoJack being BoJack just can't leave well enough alone. Even when he's changed, he still has that annoying tendency to double down. He agrees to a second interview after he's already won. He went back into Herb's to get an apology he didn't deserve. He went to Penny after already saying no to her previously and also kissing her mom, etc, etc. BoJack's journey this season can best be summed up as 1 step forward, 2 steps back, which is still better than the 3 steps back he's been taking the other 5 seasons, but it isn't great, because from this point on, he starts to slink back into some old habits. But let's talk about that second interview first.
BoJack starts the interview out a lot more cocky and jokey than he was in the previous one, thinking he's on top of the world and that this will be another slam dunk that'll get him even more attention and inflate his ego even further. But then Biscuits brings up a point that legitimately throws him off guard, and one that also throws us off guard as well. She starts off by mentioning that BoJack lied to the police and said that he wasn't with Sarah Lynn when she died, that she called him from the planetarium. She then says that there actually was a 2-minute call from Sarah Lynn's phone to BoJack's phone, 17 minutes before he called 911. Essentially, BoJack called himself using Sarah Lynn's phone, then went out to the parking lot and waited 17 minutes to make it seem like he drove there and discovered her, thus making him look completely innocent. Already, this looks really bad, but the most tragic bombshell of all comes when Biscuits mentions that Sarah Lynn wasn't actually dead yet at the planetarium. She died in the hospital, and it's entirely possible that she'd still be alive if BoJack didn't wait 17 minutes to try and cover up his own involvement in her death. This was the first time in a long while that the show legitimately took me off guard. The entire time, we all just assumed that she was dead immediately. It was a closed case that he was indirectly responsible for causing, but it was still a tragic event that left both of them victims. Sarah Lynn more so, obviously. But no, he willfully let it happen just so he wouldn't be implicated in her death. Essentially, we're experiencing the exact same thing Hollyhock went through when she heard Peter's story. We thought we knew BoJack. We know that he's done some horrible shit in the past, but we also know that he legitimately does want to move past it and become better. In spite of his horrible actions, we want to see him overcome his past and be a better person, which is exactly what Hollyhock wanted. So when she's suddenly confronted with this awful secret about him she didn't know about, she naturally feels like she can't trust him anymore and wants to distance herself from him. However, since we, the audience, have already known about this for a long time, it might be a bit difficult for us to stomach her decision since we don't have the same perspective of it being this shocking revelation. We know BoJack did this, but also that he feels remorse and wants to be better. But now, we as an audience find ourselves in the exact same position as Hollyhock, where this person we thought we knew and thought we could trust in spite of everything he's done is actually even worse than we thought. Much like everyone in the universe of the show, the revelations in this interview made me lose so much respect for BoJack, not only for doing this, but for concealing this information for so long. It felt unbelievable at first, but after giving it some thought, no, it really didn't.
The interview also goes into some of the less obvious but still problematic tendencies BoJack has, namely his sexual history with women and the power he has over them. Time and time again, BoJack either knowingly or unknowingly took advantage of women in situations that put him in a position of power he then either used for sex or to get something else he wanted. He took Penny to prom, tried to get with her mom, and then attempted to have sex with her when that failed. He slept with the president of his own fan club, which sure, she's probably obsessed with him and likely wanted it, or at least thought she did, but given those circumstances, you can't deny that puts BoJack in a position of power. He spent the past few months rebuilding his relationship with Sharona, and then immediately throws her under the bus the first chance he gets. The rehab situation, okay, that one he didn't really do anything wrong other than break something, but still, fuck Dr. Champ for that one. But all that other stuff is still highly problematic. BoJack tries to cover for himself by falling back on the addict excuse and arguing that, well, everyone just wants to feel good, and I made them feel good, while making me feel good, and that makes me okay, because everyone else is just as shitty as me. Which, you know, sounds a lot like something Season 1 or 2 BoJack would say. The interview ends with Braxby outlining everything BoJack has said over the past 2 nights. And when asked whether or not BoJack believes that this is him or not, BoJack agrees, much to the surprise of a spectating Diane.
After the interview, BoJack is told by Princess Carolyn that he should figure out how he wants to spend the next few hours before his whole world changes for the worse. An even more ominous, calm before the stormy statements than anything that was offered in the previous episode. So, he drives around and comes across a comedy club he used to perform at, where Herb immortalized him on the wall with a white outline. A charming flashback to the time before it all went wrong. He goes in to perform some stand-up and be enjoyed by an audience one last time before the interview airs. It's kind of funny though. In Season 1 or Season 2, BoJack would probably construct some elaborate heist to steal the interview footage or something. But here, it's nice to see both the show and the character acknowledge that it's not worth trying to bury or erase his heinous actions from the eyes of the public within the show. It's finally time for his past to catch up to him. And while it's pretty clear that everyone's gonna despise him in the next episode, that final shot of Diane, a person who knows all about and has seen BoJack at his worst, giving a faint smile when she finally hears him publicly admit how selfish and uncaring he's been, is a beautiful touch. Overall, an amazing episode. Probably the best of the season so far. The next episode's gonna be great too, right?
We can probably just speedrun the next episodes for BoJack here. There's not a whole lot to analyze, everything just means what it looks like it means. Hollyhock sends BoJack a letter, which he dreads to open because of what he thinks it says. Of course, when he's at a low point in the episode, he finally does open it, and while we don't actually see or hear what's written on it, it's pretty clear it said exactly what he thought it would say. She cuts off all ties with him. Nobody wants to be BoJack's sponsor at AA anymore, and they all treat him like the garbage he is. But then a returning Vance Wagner shows up and chooses to sponsor him instead. The only person willing to befriend BoJack right now is the worst character in the show. Wow. Also, they decided to make movie 43 or something, I guess. BoJack stars in a raunchy adult comedy Vance is producing, and that's the subplot. These 2 episodes are really just here to A, show how bad things are for BoJack, losing relationships, losing his job, losing his house, and B, hammer on that despite all the progress he's made, he's still BoJack and can slip up at any time.
You're slipping.
BoJack. Oh, and yeah, he got sued by the Xerox company and lost all his money, so he had to sell his house and move in with Mr. Peanutbutter. Late stage capitalism is just amazing.
I'm a bit mixed about BoJack's storyline in The Horny Unicorn for 2 reasons. First, because of course we gotta deal with Vance Wagner, and like, I know why he's here. It makes sense that the cancelled BoJack would spend time with another cancelled actor. But like, do we need to spend this much time with him? He's so shitty. Intentionally so, obviously. But I think we get the gist of that shittiness after 1 or 2 scenes. I remember when I first watched this episode knowing it was the 4th to last in the entire series, and I was just thinking about all the characters we could be spending time with instead of Vance. It's kinda like what Hollyhock said in that season 5 episode. We only have a few hours left with this show and its universe and characters. Is this really how you want to be spending this time? And speaking of Hollyhock, that's the other issue I have. Not that she cut ties with BoJack. I think that's perfectly reasonable of her after everything. It's that this is the last we hear about her in the entire show. BoJack never mentions her again, and we don't hear from any of the other characters about how she's doing. We also don't see the contents of the letter, which isn't a huge deal. We can easily surmise the sort of stuff it said. But since this mystery letter is literally the last thing involving her character in the whole show, it comes across as a bit disappointing considering just how vital she was to season 4. Again, I didn't need one last interaction between her and BoJack, but I would have liked some sort of acknowledgement that she still existed somewhere in the final 3 episodes. Oh well, what happened in the next episode? Oh yeah, Angela stuff.
Angela, BoJack's old producer and horsing around, calls him up to come over and reminisce about the good old days. So they talk, and it's revealed that the real reason she called him is to ask him to sign away his royalties to Horsing Around so they can re-edit the show without him and release it on Blu-ray. Horsing Around was BoJack's entire legacy for about half of the show. It's how people knew him at all, the thing that made him famous, the DVD set he carries around with him wherever he goes, and now he is faced with having to cut off all ties with it and finally move on from it. This is kind of a big deal. BoJack is, of course, broke right now and needs all the money he can get, so he takes the deal. Horsing Around is no more. He has now officially lost everything. Also, there's a fun joke where they mention how Michael Eisner is a caring and wonderful CEO. Just a great guy. Which is, of course, true. Michael Eisner is a wonderful man who has never done anything wrong. Hey, did you guys know that Toronto Company, one of the studios behind BoJack Horseman, was founded by Michael Eisner after he left Disney? Knowing this makes the Disneyland joke funnier in retrospect. Michael Eisner had to approve that joke. Huh? Goofy, go break his legs! Go break Michael Eisner's legs, Goofy!
What the hell?
Oh, I'm here to break your legs, are you?
Did somebody mention the door to darkness?
There's other characters to cover in episodes 13 and 14, so let's go ahead and wrap up Toad's storyline. He and Maud have moved into their own apartment, and he angrily invites Jorge and his mom over for a party so he can finally prove to them that he's made something of his life. He also invites a bunch of actors to play party guests and gives them pre-made lines to say. One of which is one of my favorite jokes in the entire show, and I quote it all the time with my friends.
I'm starting to think that smartphones are actually making us less connected.
Funny stuff out there. Funny stuff. Unfortunately, Jorge and Todd's mom can't come, meaning the whole party was for nothing. And at this point, you really start to wonder what the deal is there and why we haven't seen Todd's mom yet. Is she even alive? Is Jorge just gaslighting Todd into thinking she still exists? No, it turns out to be nothing that wacky, which is surprising for a Todd plotline. She just feels guilty about kicking Todd out of the house all those years ago, as well as the fact that she owes her son her life due to the kidney transplant. It's just normal, non-wacky guilt. But fortunately, Todd is gonna make this situation wacky with the help of character actress Margot Martindale. She's here to finally and suddenly make amends for ruining Todd's rock opera all those years ago, which sent her down a dark path. Which, like, okay? Last time we saw her, she was stealing a car from the nunnery, so why does she suddenly feel like making amends and growing a conscience? I think it's because of the show's imminent cancellation and the fact that they needed to do something to wrap up this delightful side character's journey, given how much screen time they gave her over the course of the show. So they figured the best thing to do was to speedrun a redemption arc for her. Okay, fine. Could've used more build-up, but there's bigger fish to fry with these last few episodes, and it's nice they wrapped up this character at all. After Todd and Margot fake a hostage situation in order to get both Frito Pies and Todd's mom to stop feeling guilty about having his kidney, she passes out, so they stop the charade and take her to the hospital. There, they finally have a nice heart-to-heart that rounds out Todd's character incredibly well. Maybe Todd's mom was wrong to kick him out, but he accomplished so much over the course of the 6 seasons, and he's living a goofy, unrealistic, but ultimately fun and fulfilling life. It's great to see the two of them end things on good terms. Plus, Margot Martindale gets to go scot-free and probably won't murder anyone again. You know, maybe. The only other thing that's bizarre about the storyline is how the season kinda neglected it from episodes 7 to 12. There's a pretty big gap where Todd isn't thinking about his mother or stepfather at all, until suddenly it's the focal point of the last 2 quote-unquote regular episodes of the show. But it's not too bad. Overall, a nice conclusion.
Meanwhile, we get some nice moments for Princess Carolyn and Judah. PC gets a call from Turtletop asking her to be in charge of their new female-led studio division. A division they're only doing because of 2 decades of executive sexual harassment. A division they're only doing because of 2 decades of executive sexual harassment, but a studio division they're doing nonetheless. PC and Judah quickly put some ideas together before Judah has to leave to perform with his band. PC stays to work on the slate, but changes her mind when she realizes, oh fish, I'm in love with Judah, and sprints off to the show. But it turns out Judah had his own moment just like that, and left the show to be with her. I sold my harmonica to buy you a watch chain, but you sold your watch to buy me a harmonica case. Throughout the last few seasons, we've seen how good the chemistry between these two was, and it's great for them to figure things out. And for PC to get a win after having her heart broken throughout the run of the show. Before the season came out, we were worried how the romantic relationships would pan out. We really did not want to see BoJack and Diane hook up, so Diane being with Guy is great. And while PC and BoJack wouldn't have been horrible, it still wouldn't have been ideal. So her ending up with Best Boy Judah is the best case scenario. Judah performs a love song for her, and with that, PC's arc is done.
Next up is Diane! How does her storyline wrap up? Well, she starts getting along with Sonny more, especially after he reads her book and gives constructive criticism, all while refusing to admit that he likes it since it's too girly for him. He specifically criticizes Diane saying the book takes place in Chicago, even though Ivy lives in Schaumburg. And am I Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Because I was pointing at the screen and going, hey, I know that place! I'm not as good as making pop culture analogies as Mr. Peanutbutter, I'm sorry. I mentioned earlier how I visited my girlfriend in Illinois, and while I was there, we went to a mall in Schaumburg. They have very tiny escalators at that mall. Like, what the fuck is the point? It's only like 5 steps on this thing. Just put a ramp there, weirdos. But yeah, bottom line is, Diane is having a good time writing Ivy Tran, and both PC and Sonny like her work. Also, Sonny's voice actor is listed as unknown on the BoJack Wiki, and I couldn't really tell who he was until he started ranting about Chicago-adjacent places. And I was like, is that you, Will Arnett? Because he suddenly slipped into sounding very BoJack-like, and it's a little sus.
Morton Grove, Chicago? Naperville, Chicago? That's what you sound like.
Also, Guy needs to move to Houston to be with Sonny, and Diane is fully on board. Finally, on her book tour, she noticed that Mr. Penis Man wrote a memoir, which is apparently super easy for him. Wow, great. We haven't really brought up Mr. Peanutbutter much in these last few episodes, cause, well, he doesn't really have that much to do. And that's okay. With Pickles gone, he's taking it easy and learning how to be single and being content with who he is. Diane calls him to ask about his book and catch up, and it's just really nice. I'm so glad they devoted time in the last non-BoJack-centered episode of the show to giving closure to the often tumultuous relationship between Diane and Mr. Peanutbutter. It's nice that even after everything, they're on good terms and can actually pour their hearts out to each other in a way that they never could during their relationship. For the first time, after all the self-reflection he's gone through, Mr. Peanutbutter actually listens to Diane and hears her perspective and who she is as a person. He doesn't resent the fact that Diane is talking about how perfect of a fit Guy is for her, or that she finally doesn't feel like a piece that doesn't fit anymore. He's happy for her, and lets her know that she doesn't need to feel guilty once she realizes that it's a little weird to be telling her ex-husband these sort of things. He even acknowledges his wrongdoings in their relationship and that he shouldn't have dismissed or downplayed the problems Diane had. And it's just nice and cathartic to finally hear this from him. In an episode filled with heartwarming moments for everyone who isn't Horseboy, I think Diane and Mr. Peanutbutter's conversation is my favorite part of the whole episode. Just a beautiful note for the relationship between these two to go out on. It's bittersweet how Diane acknowledges that things would have worked out better between them if they had met now. But Mr. Peanutbutter also points out that they wouldn't be the people they are today without having met each other. Just a perfect way to close things out on the story of these two.
What's not done yet is BoJack, but don't worry, he will be soon. Angela is kind of the one responsible for BoJack's long downward spiral in the first place, when you think about it. She was the one who convinced BoJack to leave her out to dry, saying she'd replace BoJack if he doesn't cooperate, which is even sadder than we thought it was before, because Angela was bluffing about getting rid of BoJack. So after a well-earned rampage, he goes back to his not house, does a shitload of drugs, gets drunk off his ass, and after watching his old audition tape from Horsing Around, takes a nice long dip in the pool. A very long dip in the pool. To emphasize how low BoJack has sunk, we get a nice shot of BoJack in the 90s auditioning for the role, which hard cuts to BoJack today. Probably the shot that summarizes the entirety of the show when you think about it.
And now we arrive at the final of the dreaded episode 11s. Even though it's episode 15 this time because of the extended season, but you know what I mean. The final of the penultimate seasonal episodes. The one where shit always goes down. And to say that these episodes go out with a bang would be an understatement.
This episode in particular is probably by this point one of, if not the most popular and discussed episodes in the entire show. So there's not a whole lot of new takes we can add to the discussion, but we're still going to talk about it anyway because that's why you clicked on this video in the first place. The episode starts with BoJack and a young Sarah Lynn walking into a fancy mansion where they are greeted by BoJack's mother from the 70s. At this point, I think everyone immediately could tell what this episode was supposed to be, and it is terrifying. BoJack goes to a dinner party with all the important people in his life who have died previously, including me apparently. We see Sarah Lynn and his mother, as previously mentioned, Herb, Corduroy Jackson, his co-star from Secretariat, his uncle Crackerjack that he has never met before, how he knows what his voice sounds like despite not being alive at the same time as him, I do not know, and the guest of honor who shows up late, more on him later. In the kitchen, a red cardinal appears, and everyone has to work together to get it out of the house. Cardinals can be used to represent deceased loved ones watching over you, while a cardinal hitting a window means death. While eating dinner, everyone talks about the meanings of their death and whether they had any to begin with. Does your death invalidate the meaning of your life? Did your life ever mean anything at all? Also, when you look at the plates, everyone is eating the last thing they ate in life. Corduroy is eating a lemon, Sarah Lynn has McDonald's, Beatrice has hospital food, etc., etc. BoJack also notes that his water tastes like chlorine and is repeatedly getting hit by black watery sludge. By this point, we can infer that BoJack either has or is drowning in his old pool. BoJack hand waves this whole event by saying this is a reoccurring dream he has all the time, but never gets to see his dad show up. So this is likely no different. Anyway, his dad shows up.
Oh no!
But don't worry everyone, it's not actually his dad, it's Secretariat! Well, actually, it's his dad and Secretariat combined, but both in Secretariat's body. The implications of this are kind of obvious, but still tragic. BoJack essentially viewed Secretariat as so much more of a role model growing up that his brain has changed Secretariat into his father figure. Part of me wonders if this was their original plan, or if they just couldn't get John Krasinski back to voice Secretariat for this episode. Because really, my only tiny nitpick with what's otherwise a pretty perfect episode is that it can be a bit confusing sometimes telling who's talking, Butterscotch or Secretariat. Hell, the composite character acknowledges that it's a bit confusing within the episode.
I know this part is confusing because I'm Secretariat and also your dad for some reason.
But it nonetheless makes sense why BoJack's mind would combine these two together. Anyway, Butterscotchetariat joins in on the conversation the rest of them are having, which is all about the nature of life and death, and whether any of their lives or their deaths meant something. Does Crackerjack serving his country inherently mean that his life meant more than other people's? Clearly not, especially because it turns out all his kills were friendly fire, but it was food for thought that the other characters comment on in interesting ways. And like, while Crackerjack's death can be considered a sacrifice, Sarah Lynn's entire life can also be considered one, since she never got to grow up in a normal way, and was constantly used by the people around her as a tool for entertainment. The character has always existed as a profoundly tragic commentary on the nature of child stars, and what happens to them over time. How they give everything to their art, even though they're not emotionally or mentally prepared for the consequences of fame. Now is as good a time as any to mention an observation I made in between work on this video series. Every time there's a child character in the show, they're always voiced by a high-pitched adult, rather than an actual child actor. I feel like that's the show's way of acknowledging how fucked up the industry is when it comes to child actors, and not wanting to even risk contributing to a real-life Sarah Lynn situation.
Going back a little bit, the whole conversation about sacrifice is very interesting, especially given what we know about these characters. If a sacrifice you're making is genuinely helping those around you, then it is a good thing for you to do, as long as it isn't hurting you that much. But if a sacrifice is only hurting you and not benefiting anyone else in any meaningful way, then it's probably not a good idea to do that. You're just turning yourself into a martyr. And if the sacrifice is something inconsequential that you're only doing for good boy points, like not eating shrimp during Lent or some shit like that, who cares? Herb's sacrifices were in the form of community service, which directly had benefits for those around him, and it seems like he genuinely enjoyed doing it. Now, at that point, you can argue whether that counts as a sacrifice if it's something you want to do, but it's still time you're using up and work you're doing, so I'd say it still counts. However, Herb was also a fully grown man. He was elderly and lived a full life. Had he died in his 30s like Sarah Lynn and was hot off getting kicked out of horsing around, he might have thought the same way about the situation that Sarah Lynn is. Sarah Lynn is angry at her death. She gave up everything because her parents wanted her to be a star and lived such a shitty life. It's possible that if Herb had died earlier, he wouldn't be as well-spirited about it as he is now. Also, a quick note, Sarah Lynn is shown in every stage of her life since BoJack basically knew her his entire life, while everyone else is shown largely at the primary age when BoJack knew them. Corduroy's contribution to this scene is to discuss pleasure. He died from autoerotic asphyxiation, he died in search of a high. He views this as shameful, which causes him to view all pleasure as sinful. He believes that sacrifice doesn't mean anything if you get something out of it. This is not a positive way to think, as equating all pleasure and happiness to sin is not a good way to live your life. This is probably meant to be symbolic of some religions, which seem to glorify atonement and suffering for the greater good. I'm pretty sure Jesus liked helping people though, so I don't really agree with Corduroy here. His argument also goes back to what I was saying earlier about sacrifice only hurting you. You not jerking off is not going to help your neighbor win the best lawn competition this year. Nobody cares. Meanwhile, Beatrice doesn't really talk about her death because she doesn't even remember it. So she's just here to complain and berate everyone else to keep them talking. It's in character for her and helps things move along.
Eventually, the dinner conversation wraps up and everyone prepares for a show, which BoJack assumes he won't be able to go to because he always wakes up at this part of the recurring dream. But this time, he doesn't wake up. At this point, you start to wonder, wait, is this it? Is BoJack actually dying? Is this how it ends for him? The episode was already unnerving by its very nature of bringing dead characters back for BoJack to spend some time with. But you started to ease into it because of how non-panicked BoJack was. Okay, this is just a regular thing for him. That's fine, I guess. But this is where the anxiety starts to rise, and it only goes up from here. BoJack finally gets to attend the talent show that his deceased loved ones put on, starting with Herb, the MC of the night, introducing Sarah Lynn. And her performance is a sudden and unexpected reprise of Don't Stop Dancing, the same song Gina sang to BoJack in a hallucination last season. It's such a genius and chilling inclusion because it calls all the way back to Season 1, Episode 3, with the words BoJack told a young Sarah Lynn on the set of Horsing Around. He told her that she has to give the people what they want, even if it kills you, even if it empties you out until there's nothing left to empty, and that no matter how much it hurts, you don't stop dancing and you don't stop smiling, and you give the people what they want. While it was easy to miss the repeated use of the phrase "don't stop dancing" when Gina first sang it in Season 5, it's impossible to ignore just how horrific it is that Sarah Lynn is now cheerfully singing the same horrifying adage BoJack told her all those years ago. The song itself fits Sarah Lynn even more so than it fit Gina, since she truly never stopped dancing and gave everything to her art, even when it destroyed her. It helps too that the song has been adapted, not just lyrically to fit Sarah Lynn and the creepy dead people dream dimension they're all in, but also musically. While Gina's version of the song transitioned into a musical theater ballad, since that was her musical style of choice, Sarah Lynn's becomes a pop number reminiscent of the music she used to make during her life. Her lyrics reflect the fact that her legacy, all her music, the art that she managed to put out into the world despite her suffering, will still live on after her death. And she seems to encourage BoJack to likewise accept death, since his legacy will also remain. This is of course less true in BoJack's case since he's been edited out of horsing around, but it still remains a chilling sentiment to think about. Was Sarah Lynn's life well spent? A life of suffering and torment, but a respectable legacy to leave behind? Was it worth it? It seems like to Sarah Lynn in this episode, it has to be. Otherwise, what was all her suffering for? And so, the song ends with an abrupt cutting of the music as she sings her final verse mostly a cappella. The chatter stops, the crowd departs. A needle drops, representing both a literal music needle drop and the heroin needle that killed her. The music starts. A song you taught me when I was small. That scene from Season 1, Episode 3, that Sarah Lynn internalized all her life. Don't stop dancing. Don't stop dancing.
BoJack rushes to see where she went, and she's nowhere to be seen. She's gone. The door is death itself. Sarah Lynn being the first to walk through the door is also very important. This is Sarah Lynn, the one whose death had the most impact on his life. The death that has had ramifications on him when it first happened in 2016 and still has ramifications right now. Despite all the weird sex stuff, BoJack always kind of viewed her as a daughter of sorts. This is also why we see her as a child and then growing back up throughout the episode. So her being the one to finally make BoJack realize what's happening right now is the most tragic way to find out, and also the most fitting. It was the event that kickstarted his course for the second half of the show, and it's the one that's gonna bring the show to an end. Sure, Herb was BoJack's best friend, but Herb was already out of BoJack's life for so long, so it wouldn't be as impactful. Plus, given Herb having cancer, he kind of braced himself for that death and saw it coming. Sarah Lynn was completely unexpected and sudden, the same way she walked through the door. Zach Braff and Corduroy's performances are mostly passed off as jokes, so there's not much to say. Beatrice and Crackerjack perform together. They do a musical act with Crackerjack playing I Will Always Think of You from Season 4 on the trumpet, and Beatrice ribbon dancing. It's an artful performance referencing what they used to do in their prime. It's at this point that BoJack sneaks off to have a heart-to-heart with Dad Rotariat. Secretariat Dad is the super cynical one here in regards to both his death and everyone else's. He feels that none of the whole feeling good about their life and helping people stuff matters because everyone else there would immediately go back to Earth if given the chance. While yes, most people would, if they enjoyed helping people in the first place, why wouldn't they go back to help even more people? His other main point is that it doesn't matter who you are and what you did, because in the end, we're all gonna die and end up in the same place. Secretary inspired millions. His dad did care in his own way, but it doesn't matter because here he is now, dead with everyone else. As cynical as this section is, it is kind of nice to see BoJack be able to reconcile with his dad, something he didn't get to do in real life because he died in a fucking duel or some shit. This is also where we finally see for certain what BoJack's current situation is. Faced with the harsh reality that this isn't a dream, it's real, and he is drowning. By this point, BoJack is frantic in trying to rationalize every way he couldn't be dead. That's when he remembered he did the thing he always does when he doesn't know what to do, and called Diane. He can't be drowning if he's talking to Diane, right? Right?
This is a good time to mention just how chilling and excellent the set design is for this episode. It just looks so haunting and subtly nightmarish, not just in terms of the deep purples and eerie window shadows, but the crooked angles all over the place. It really does make you feel like you're in purgatory, since it's creepy and filled with death vibes, but not overly hell-like. Back to the performances, Zach Braff mentions Shake Shack, which I thought was nice because Shake Shack is epic.
Zach Braff's short stack breakfast attack at Shake Shack.
It's fitting that a comedic character who had a joke death goes out in this episode by giving us the last silly tongue twister. A joke style that I thought they overused in the last few seasons, but it was nice to get one last one here at the end. Anyway, Secretariat takes the stage to give us his original poem, The View from Halfway Down. To me, the peak of the chilling performances in this episode was Sarah Lynn's, because of how much it's been built up to over the course of the entire series, but Secretariat is a very close second. And in terms of its actual content, it probably takes the cake. The poem essentially recounts the thoughts that went into his head during his suicide, which by itself is a chilling thought. And if you'd like to skip past the discussion of suicide, here's a timestamp to do so. But it gets even worse as it becomes evident that he regretted his fall from the bridge as it was happening. The door that brings about everyone's death continues to inch closer to him as he reads more of the poem, even though he insists that he is not done, not ready to go yet. But the words of the poem speak to the harsh reality that it doesn't matter, that he jumped and is now about to die, and that no newfound fear of the view from halfway down is going to change that. It's over. His choice has been made, and all we're left with are his chilling, anxiety-filled final thoughts about how much he doesn't want to die anymore. It might legitimately be the most intense, dramatic moment of the entire series. And regardless of our speculation of whether or not John Krasinski was supposed to come back for Secretariat in this episode or not, it's nonetheless perfectly fitting that Will Arnett gets to have the most dramatic and chilling moments of the entire show. Secretariat's poem ends abruptly, a dark reflection of how abruptly his thoughts ended alongside his fall. And with that, the terror has hit in full force for BoJack as he tries to escape but can't. He asks Herb if anyone has ever come back from this place, to which Herb responds that there is no place, and that his brain is just going through what it thinks it needs to go through. He watches as Crackerjack and Beatrice disappear into the black goo of the door following their performance, and with no one else left to perform, Herb begins introducing him, mentioning all his previous works, adding that he's husband and father to no one, notably not mentioning Hollyhock considering how she disassociated herself from him, and finally, by calling back to the nagging thing that BoJack's brain can't stop calling him. A stupid piece of shit. It's BoJack's turn. The drip finally stops. At first, he seems to accept his fate and tells Herb, "See you on the other side." But it's Herb's chilling last words before getting consumed by the goo that cause BoJack to spiral and panic once more. Oh, BoJack, no. There is no other side. This is it.
The image of the pool is now encompassing everything outside of the performance room. He looks up and sees his fate crashing down on him. The drops of water get more intensive, and the black goop from the door starts sucking everything in quicker. BoJack rushes for the house, doing everything he can to escape the goo, running away from death itself. We see the bird from before, now corrupted, about to be consumed as well. The house is falling apart as it's swallowed up whole by the darkness. I would like to think the black goo is meant to represent the tar from the LA tar pits, going back to the conversation Charlotte and BoJack had in Season 1. It's finally here to swallow BoJack whole and drag him under. BoJack does find the phone and call Diane in hopes of waking up, but as it turns out, while he did call her, she was asleep. She didn't pick up. So without Diane there to tell him not to, he jumped in the pool anyway and drowned. There is no escape. With this, BoJack moves on from the bargaining phase and accepts his fate, asking the not Diane to stay with him until the goo takes him in. This sequence is slightly chilling. Herb tells BoJack earlier that all of this is just his brain going through what it has to go through before turning off for good. This is reinforced during the conversation with fake Diane. She's very calm, as if she's trying to soothe him before he passes on. That's because this is what he needs to hear right now. This is not how Diane would actually react in real life, but since this is BoJack's death dream, she behaves like this because it's ultimately what BoJack wants to hear before he finally dies. BoJack drowning in the pool has been something foreshadowed by the show for quite some time. Of course, obviously in the intro, BoJack falls into the pool at the end every time, and in those instances, every time BoJack falls, Diane is there to save him. Well, also Mr. Peanutbutter, but I'm sure Erica is there off-screen about to teach him about proper lifesaver throwing. But this time, now that he's finally fallen for real, Diane isn't there to bail him out. There's been other hints too. BoJack had a fantasy in season 1 about how he thought he'd die, in which he went out into the water as an old man, knowing he wouldn't be able to swim back to shore, and allows the water to take him under. The painting above his desk in his office always depicted a horse treading water in a pool, while another simply stared back at him, much like how BoJack is staring at his ultimate fate during the final sequence of this scene.
BoJack's death was a tragic, but ultimately deserved fate for the character. Given his long history with substance abuse, it only makes sense for him to die while intoxicated, and in the pool that he constantly ends up in every theme song no less. Furthermore, given the amount of suffering this character has inflicted on so many people, it only seems right that this should be the way his character goes out.
Just kidding, he ain't fucking dead.
Wait, what the fuck? Seriously? This was a bit of a hard pill to swallow at first, because of how definitive an ending for the character the view from halfway down seemed to be. It felt like a bit of a cop-out, considering the lengths they went to show that there was absolutely no coming back from this precarious situation. But while it can feel cheap in the moment, it does nonetheless make a lot of sense thematically. BoJack has always had to live with the shitty things he's done to people, and death would have been the ultimate escape from all that, the easy way out. But life isn't easy, and sometimes you just have to find other ways to come to terms with what you've done and move on. So I'm glad he's not dead, if only because I don't really think he deserves an easy way out. All that's left for him is the chance to get better and try to make things right in whatever way he can going forward. And what that entails is open to the interpretation of the viewer, since we're not jumping that far ahead. Well, we are by a year, at least. BoJack's been in prison after breaking and entering into his former home, and it definitely didn't help that the jury entirely consists of people he's wronged in the past. Beyonce! Also in this opening montage, we get one last reference to Wanda, showing that she awoke from a second coma, which I guess is why she was never in the show again after season 2. I really wish they could have found some way to bring her back, but it's nice to get this acknowledgement at the very least.
We learned from Rehab that BoJack benefits from having a good schedule. The routine is good for him. It keeps him in check. So naturally, the prison life turns out to be good for him. We even see him putting on a play with the other inmates in prison. And the play in question happens to be Hedda Gabler. He's finally doing Ibsen. We quickly find out that PC pulled some strings to get BoJack released from prison for a day so he could attend her and Judah's wedding. So this last episode sees BoJack meeting up with all the main cast members one final time to catch up and see where they all are in life. This episode establishes where each relationship ends and allows for one-on-one time with everyone. First up, we get time with Mr. Peanutbutter, who picks him up from prison. This is the shortest section and the least impactful, mostly because it's just here to pay off some running gags. Mr. Peanutbutter has always been the big funny joke character anyway, so there isn't much for the two to do one-on-one anyway. The fact that they technically live together now is growth enough. So yeah, we get a payoff to the D story from season 1, with Mr. Peanutbutter ordering a new D to return Hollywood back to its original name. Is what I would say if they didn't also pay off the running gag of all the flyers and banners he orders containing horrible typos. So we end the show with Hollywood. Incredible. We get one final Erica joke, and that's a series wrap on Mr. Peanutbutter. In retrospect, it's weird we didn't get another Zoe or Zelda joke. Thought they would have done more of that theme overall.
So now BoJack's alone at the wedding, and he thinks about heading up to the roof before Todd runs into him, asking him to come down to the beach so he can sit on BoJack's shoulders and watch the fireworks. Turns out he was mainly doing that just to get BoJack out of the party since he seemed overwhelmed. Aww, he's so sweet. Even though Todd is as goofy silly of a character as Mr. Peanutbutter, it's important to acknowledge that the relationship between him and BoJack does hold a lot more dramatic weight than the one between BoJack and Mr. Peanutbutter. And that's what I love about this last conversation between them. How supportive and encouraging Todd is to BoJack, in spite of everything BoJack's put him through. BoJack vents about how staying sober is easy now that he's in jail, and how he's worried about what'll happen when he gets out. A parallel to the beginning of the season where he didn't want to leave rehab and go back out into the real world. But Todd assures him that every day he'll break his record for being sober, and that if he relapses, he'll just become sober again. He even uses the Hokey Pokey song as a metaphor for getting better and repairing relationships, which happened between him and his mom even though he didn't expect it, and as he implies, might be happening between him and BoJack.
And that's nice to hear. The main characters of this show all have their faults, but out of all of them, Todd has stuck out as the most genuine and kind person throughout the entire series. Yeah, he's the least complicated, and he's mainly there to serve as comic relief, but the show really wouldn't be the same without him and his genuine optimism and enthusiasm. When we first started writing this retrospective, I considered Mr. Peanutbutter to be my favorite of the main 5, but over time, Todd has easily usurped that position. Maybe I'm biased since he taught me things about my sexuality that I never even knew about, but even apart from that, I just feel like he's been one of the most positive aspects to come out of a pretty depressing show, and I value him immensely for that. Sometimes it doesn't feel like the writers put as much into him compared to other characters, but he's absolutely a character that I got more out of than what they put in. Speaking of which, Todd reflects on whether the point of art like the hokey pokey is less what people put into it and more what they get out of it, but eventually he loses track of the point he had, in classic Todd fashion, and says,
"Oh well, it was nice while it lasted, right?"
I wouldn't have expected the title of the episode to come from the Todd portion, but it is a perfect summation of the entire show, I suppose. It was indeed nice while it lasted. Oh yeah, also BoJack tries honeydew and actually likes it. Now that's a character arc if I've ever seen one.
Alright, third on the list is Princess Carolyn. The conversation starts out as all business. We hear about how big of a production the wedding was, and find out that it wasn't even a real wedding. The two had a small wedding the day before. The current wedding is just a facade for industry's reps to schmooze at. Judah isn't there as he's doing paperwork. A small tidbit we also get is that somehow BoJack had time to finish filming Horny Unicorn before not dying. Maybe they used the CG model again? Princess Carolyn seems kinda torn on whether or not BoJack should return to acting, which runs through the entire conversation. The movie is tracking well, and some Hollywood reps seem interested in getting BoJack back in the saddle. But both Princess Carolyn and BoJack do realize that if he jumps right back into acting proper, he could lose control once again. BoJack comments on how he thought when he got to the wedding there'd be a big disaster of some kind that he either be involved in or outright cause, which would end in a sitcom ending where Princess Carolyn has cold feet and BoJack would have to talk her into going through with the wedding. This didn't happen, but given the relationship the two have, it's kinda cute. Everything is a show of these two, so using the framework of a sitcom, which is how these two even met in the first place, is fitting. We hear PC's version of how events would have gone, and BoJack responds in the most BoJack way possible.
Yes, all those things could be true. But on the other hand, what if you deserve to be happy, and maybe don't worry about whether you'll be happy later, and just focus on how you're happy right now?
The whole exchange is sweet and a good send-off for Princess Carolyn. We get to see her finally achieve her dreams from the past 6 seasons and end up in a good spot with BoJack. The scene leaves it ambiguous whether or not she'll still be his agent going forward, but either way we'll know they'll still be friends. The overall message of the scene is that nobody should ever doubt Princess Carolyn, not even Princess Carolyn.
In case you haven't noticed by now, the episode is set up in order of the characters that have the least to most significance to BoJack's life. His begrudging acquaintance, Mr. Peanutbutter, his estranged friend that he still cares for, Todd, his agent/manager/ex-girlfriend who he's known for so long and who's stuck by him through thick and thin, Princess Carolyn. On paper, you might look at their relationship and wonder, how can any relationship be more significant than that? And then there's Diane. Even though the time BoJack has known her is shorter than the time he's known the other 3 main characters, their relationship has always been the cornerstone of the series. It's the sort of connection that you don't see too often in media. And considering how the show began at the point where BoJack met Diane, it's only fitting that it ends at what is likely the last time they would ever see each other. Diane has moved on with her life, as we've seen throughout this season. And when BoJack comes up to the roof to see her, she's noticeably a lot more hostile than the other characters in this episode. For starters, she's upset that BoJack is doing the Horny Unicorn with Vance Wagner, which, to be fair, I am too. It's the one aspect of this finale that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Not only the fact that this project is still going forward and that this is going to be a part of BoJack's legacy, but also the fact that Princess Carolyn implies it's going to be his big comeback in Hollywood. Yeah, that's certainly realistic, but still such a cynical, sour note to end BoJack's professional career on within the show. I really wish Vance Wagner could have died in an accident off screen or something, and then all the footage for the Horny Unicorn could have gotten burned up. I don't know, it isn't out of the question for this goofy ass show that something like that could happen off screen.
On the other hand, you can also view Horny Unicorn as a consequence of BoJack's actions during his relapse. He chose to be in the movie to stick it to society for canceling him, but now that all the money's been spent and the movie's been shot, it's coming out and there's nothing BoJack can do to stop that. He made that choice, and he has to live with it. He regrets it now, but hey, that's just one more addition to the long list he currently has.
Going back to Diane, while she doesn't like the horny unicorn thing, she's even more upset with the voicemail BoJack left her a year ago. She believed he was dead and that it was her fault for leaving LA and not being there to help him. And the whole situation traumatized her and prevented her from moving to Houston with Guy. Throughout it all, she remained angry with BoJack for having this power over her. Another sobering indication of the fact that even when it seems like BoJack is out of someone's life, his influence can still harm them in ways he didn't even consider. But ultimately, Diane made it past this and moved to Houston to be with her boyfriend at the time. When BoJack asks about that "at the time" distinction, she lifts her hand to reveal a ring. I really like the way they keep you guessing here. It's kinda cruel, but also dramatically effective. We want to hope that everything worked out well for Diane, and that in spite of everything she's been through, she can finally trust the happiness she feels with Guy. But we don't know. A lot can happen in a year, and maybe it didn't work out. As a side note, I kinda wish they gave us some confirmation that Todd and Maud were still together, but I don't really have any reason to believe they aren't, so that's okay. But with Diane, it's nice to get this explicit confirmation that she did have a happy ending with the right guy for her. She continues on and mentions how there are people who made you into the person you are today, and you can be grateful for them even if they were never meant to be in your life forever. Which is a wonderful sentiment that rings so true. Diane still remains grateful that she knew these kind of people, like Mr. Peanutbutter and BoJack. She heartfully tells him thank you, and that it's gonna be okay, and that I'm sorry. She never specifies what she's referring to with any of these, and BoJack never asks, but the implication is that it's about everything. BoJack, as flawed as he was a constant in Diane's crazy, screwed up life. BoJack still has so many things to work through, but it's gonna be okay. And she's sorry that she couldn't help him more, or be there every single time he needed someone. She ends with one more thank you, and gets up to leave. But BoJack doesn't seem entirely ready to accept the fact that this is probably it between them, in spite of how important they've been to each other's lives over the 6 seasons we've seen of them. So he tells her a cute little anecdote from prison about a guy who always forces everyone to watch the same movie every week. And he concludes with,
"Yeah, well, what are you gonna do? Life's a bitch and then you die, right?"
But Diane counters with,
"Sometimes life's a bitch and then you keep living."
The sentiment that summarizes BoJack's situation in this episode perfectly. But at least they have this nice night together, watching the stars on the roof as we hear the song Mr. Blue start playing. And that's a series wrap on their friendship and BoJack Horseman.
Season 6 was a bittersweet ending to one of my favorite shows of all time. For all its flaws, it still felt like a well-made finale to the series, paying off some plot threads that have been building up for a while, and giving all the principal cast a good send-off. Everyone is in exactly the place they should be at the end. While it is a bit lopsided, feeling both rushed and stretched out at some points, it isn't enough to ruin the season. One thing I liked is how it retroactively makes Season 1 feel more important, as well as being somewhat of a reflection of both that season and the back half of Season 3. Season 6 is a good bookend to the show and rewards the fans who paid attention all the way through. Sure, I would have liked for some things like the Penny plotline to be resolved in a more fulfilling way, or for Todd to get spotlight earlier so the mom subplot didn't feel as rushed as it did, but in the end they did the best they could with the hand they were dealt. The show is getting cancelled, so they had to wrap everything up right now. The only alternative would have been to not tie those loose ends up at all, and what we got is much more preferable. It's not the best season of the show, not by a lot to be honest, but it's still an excellent ending to the series.
Calling this season the second weakest shouldn't be construed as an insult in the slightest. It had flaws, and overall the second half of the season was much more compelling than the first half, but overall it was a truly excellent way to conclude the series. I'd give it an 8 out of 10 personally, but it had plenty of 10 out of 10 moments and episodes. And with that, this retrospective that took over 2 years to complete, not because it actually took that long, but because we're kinda lazy, has come to a close. Looking back on this show as a whole, it's hard to overstate just how much it means to me. Yeah, I went ahead and critically picked apart a ton of aspects of it, but in spite of the issues it had here and there, its good elements weren't just good,
They were some of the best things I've ever seen in any piece of media. This is a series that can run the full gamut of human emotion and can make you feel every possible way there is. Delighted, amused, saddened, angry, in awe, etc. There's no other series out there that I can safely say has some of the funniest comedy I've ever seen and some of the most raw, intense drama I've ever seen. There's no other series that can take a world and a premise that's so inherently goofy and weird and turn it into one of the most rich, mature, thought-provoking pieces of artistic expression there is. It just seems impossibly good. Like, there's no conceivable way that human beings manage to take all of these conflicting elements and make them into something this amazingly spectacular. It's for all of these reasons and more why BoJack Horseman is without a doubt my favorite TV show of all time. And what's more, it might just be the best thing that's ever happened.
Overall, well, what do you want us to say about the show we didn't just say already in the past 6 videos you just watched? BoJack Horseman is a great show, and if you haven't seen it yet, well, we just spoiled all of it for you. Whoops! Go watch it anyway. We highly recommend it. It's dark, it's funny, it's bold, it's crazy, it's dramatic, it's everything you want out of an adult animated sitcom. These characters' stories may be over, but we're never gonna forget about them. It's just a great show, we love it, please give it a chance if you haven't already. And if you have, watch it again, you clearly have time if you're watching these videos anyway, what the fuck else you got going on? Is there something we didn't talk about that you wanted to hear our thoughts on, or something you want us to elaborate further on? Please let us know in the comments below. Give us ideas of what else you want to see from us in regards to BoJack Horseman.
Okay, we're done. Does this mean you'll let me out of your basement now, William?
No, not until you review the bad guys.
Whoa!